What is happening out there, rotoscouts football fans? Might as well just get started. Just kind of been sitting here waiting for the start of the show the last couple of minutes. Must really like you guys, though, because I tell you, this baseball playoffs are on. The Empire Strikes Back is on right now. I was watching that for a couple of minutes. And here I am, jumping on, doing a football show for who knows how long. Should be a fun one. We're here to talk through game by game the main slate for tomorrow, week 5 of the NFL season. Week 5 already. That's the one. That's something that just gets me about the way that the NFL is configured. Just how quickly it goes and how much the indicator of each week going by lets you know during the season how quickly the season is going. The fact that we're in week 5 already, we're dealing with bye weeks already, we're dealing with all kinds of crazy shit already. Just goes too quick. There's not enough games. I was reminded by my friend Charlie that when I was having a few beers the other night, apparently I was railing a little bit about, well, if they're going to play so few games and the math isn't going to really matter and the sample sizes are all small, what does it matter? You know, you can't hit anybody anymore, so why don't we just convert this thing to a two-hand touch league with modern electronics, make it really cool, and play like 80 games a year. 3 times a week. I was apparently going off about it the other day. Don't really stand by those opinions. Obviously just trying to provoke a little bit of discussion. But yeah, I thought it was an interesting take by me anyway. But yeah, not enough games, too small. But I don't want these guys to go out there and maybe they need like B teams for all these teams. You get your A team games, your B team games, you need a C team game. If you don't game the schedule the right way, you can end up with your C team against the other team's A team. Get totally wiped out. I think that's what happened to Denver against Miami. I don't know. Just drives me bonkers every time I get into these stats, into these numbers, how much of it relies on just nonsense, recency, tiny samples. Looks like we got Cujo here. What's up, Cujo? I'm doing well this evening, buddy. Feeling better than I was earlier today for the baseball show, which is good. Claritin kicked in and helped out a lot. Just hanging out here. Got caffeinated. Baseball lineup was doing pretty well. Ended up with a Kyle Bradish Orioles stack that didn't really come through, but I had Santander. I had Mountcastle. I've got some Diamondbacks coming up later on. I've got Michael A in there. We're hanging on in the big tournament, but doesn't look like a winner at this point, unfortunately. We'll see what the Diamondbacks do. It's got a shot still. I know Cubs fan Dennis was in that tournament. I don't know if anybody in his lineup started playing yet. Oh, yep. Looks like he's got Verlander. That's a good start. Cubs fan has Verlander, who's got 40 already on FanDuel at 23.9% ownership. He's got Ozzie Albies, Orlando Arcia, Marcelo Ozuna, who was the home run pick today, and Ronnie Acuna. And he's got another 4 guys that we can't see yet. So Dennis has a chance to get involved here. He's not far out of contention already. I like it. Matthew's here. Matthew says, sounds like you're smoking and drinking my kind of stuff. Always, buddy. Yeah, the Wednesday night hang is always fun. My buddy Charlie comes over. It used to be our Wednesday night poker game. Now the poker game still exists online. You guys are welcome to play anytime. $20. Just got to PayPal me or whatever. Hit me up in the Discord if you want the info. During COVID, we switched it from a live game every week to an online game on this shitty app called Poker with 3 R's. And we just kind of kept it there. Couldn't really get back to having 30, 40 people in my apartment every week, dealing with all the cigarette smoke and all the garbage that people would leave behind and everything. So we just kind of left it online. But my buddy Charlie still comes over. We hang out. I usually have beers. We both smoke. We hang out. We shoot the breeze. Kind of half-ass the poker tournament every week. Don't really pay much attention to it, especially as I get like progressively more drunk. Becomes harder and harder to stop ranting about football and remember to check the app for what's going on in the poker game. Trey's here. What's up, Trey? Did you get your baseball lineups in? Did you play anything? Handful of people here coming in. 9 people so far. More people typically join this one as it goes on. I know more people also just check it out overnight, Sunday morning. I know Larry was saying, I think it was Larry, was saying that he had to watch it half at night and then half again Sunday morning last week to catch the second half of the show. I'm going to try not to go that long this week. I think we can make it a little bit tighter. I added some stuff to the dashboard for some routes run details. So instead of like crazy notes, it was a little bit easier on me going through. I don't have to just sit here and try and document all these different things. I think I've got a fairly decent board now. We'll see. Every time I say that, though, I come up with something else I want on there or something stops working. So we'll see what happens. OS is here. OS says, how many Lions is too many? Also thoughts on Kirk JJ stack. How many Lions is too many? I don't really have a... more than the quarterback and like 2 skill players is typically not something that I do, so we can go there. But I like that spot for the Lions, so I think I can get into it even with Amon-Ra most likely not playing. I think that's kind of interesting. Played 2 lineups just for the stake on NFL. Yeah, I've just got the one in on FanDuel for the baseball slate in the whatever they call that tournament. Matthew Patterson, wish I was closer. Jersey and Wisconsin, bit of a drive. A little bit. On the plus side, though, it's still online for that poker game, so you could jump in if you want to. Streak, not stake. Okay. I was wondering what just for the stake meant. I kind of thought maybe it's like an expression wherever you come from, like, just for the hell of it, just for something cool. Like, who doesn't love steak, right? So it's just something fun, something good, something to sink your teeth into. How about that? So let's dive into this thing. Handful of people here watching. My favorite thing about today, I think. We'll start on this board. Oh, by the way, related to a comment that was... hang on. This is stuck on me now. Hold on. See what I mean? About every time I add something to the dashboard, something dies? Why would this stupid thing freeze? Hey, there we go. Just for the hell of it, just decided to lock up. I forget who it was. Fnatic, I think. I don't know if Fnatic's here yet. Fnatic mentioned sorting the board in a different way. The reason it was a little bit out of sorts yesterday, and it is if you look at it one way, like, just straight down the line. Obviously, this is a bunch of mixed guys. The way that it's sorted right now is by FanDuel projection, and then in with each team sorted by team alphabetically. That's the way it's sorted right now. And then what I did for yesterday's show when we were focused on quarterbacks and stacks, I just did that. So that's why it didn't look like it was any kind of order, because it became just winnowing it down to the quarterbacks, and then it was just alphabetical by these teams. But yeah, point taken for that show. Fnatic, I will make sure to sort those a little bit more sanely next time. I think maybe go by the Vegas total, because that's kind of how I broke the games down, was by the Vegas total that last time. But yeah, I appreciate the note. And on this board, as I said, it's probably a little bit more straightforward that it's going by fantasy points. Again, it's sorted by FanDuel fantasy points, so at times you'll have different, like technically on DK, if we switched it, Marquise would go over James Conner here, but we can deal with that, I think. So as I was about to say before the board froze, my favorite thing on this entire Saturday so far is that this Giants game, the total swung another 1.5 in Miami's direction without the game total changing, the spread rather. And when I input the change in Vegas into the model, it basically directly took 3 points that were on Danny Dimes' projection and put them on Tua's projection, which I loved, because I felt like we had Tua a little bit low. I don't know where he went. Yeah, he went right there. So I felt like we had Tua like a couple points low going up against the Giants. And I felt like, as I talked about yesterday on the show, Danny Dimes in the 19s was making me really uncomfortable. I didn't like that at all. So with no manipulation whatsoever, I was saying at the end of the show, like, I hope something happens that I don't have to weigh in here that And I didn't know that it even, that swinging a point and a half like that would have that big of an impact. And I also didn't expect that it would give the exact amount of points from one to the other. But here we are. Uptick across the board a little bit for the Dolphins for the skill players. The Giants, downgrades for the most part. Saquon, still kind of a mystery. They're calling him a game time decision. We'll get into some of that. But that was my absolute favorite thing that happened with the line movement. A couple other minor ups and downs, but nothing crazy impactful. Everything's been accounted for. A lot of ins and outs. A lot of ins, a lot of outs, a lot of what have you. A lot of stuff to keep in the dude's head. Such a good movie. I was watching that again the other day. It's been on one of the cable channels, so it keeps popping up, and I can't resist Lebowski if it's on. Matthew Patterson not putting $1 on Dobbs and Hollywood Brown. Always put your money on winning plays. All right. I don't know. I kind of like that Arizona stack today. That is our first game up, so we can kind of use that as a pivot point here. No, not if we're doing it that way. I'm going to go by... Yeah, That's not our first game up. Baltimore and Pittsburgh is our first game up. Somebody in the chat was mentioning that Lamar was under-owned. I saw that in there too. We'll use that as our pivot point. Waddle's Matthew Patterson's favorite receiver on the slate, period. Look, that would be a great spot. I tend to think he would go a little bit under-owned compared to his teammate. So I do like that as a comparative spot. I do think they'll both be popular, though. But yeah, Trey was saying Lamar is so under-owned. That's a good thing. I always like getting a superstar player when he's under-owned. The thing with this game, for me, 38-point total. Pittsburgh favored by, Baltimore favored by 4. Baltimore's very good defense going up against the Steelers offense that I really don't have that much respect for at this point. I can see kind of a wipeout here where Baltimore doesn't really need to run things up too much. What you would need there, I think, is it doesn't have to be extreme, because if he's low owned and he just comes through to, get past these projections, but deliver something in that neighborhood, I think you're okay. But to really hit that ceiling, you probably would need that game where he runs in a pair of touchdowns and then throws a pair of touchdowns. And then that's accounting for your scoring. And then whatever happens later in the game doesn't matter. You need him to be involved in all that scoring. The good news is it's typically how this thing goes with this team. We saw a little bit of an uptick, a little bit more snap certainty for Gus Edwards, who is a little bit of an explosive back going up against a rush defense that's allowing 4.7 yards per rush attempt, 28th in the league. They're also allowing 7.1 yards per pass attempt, 27th in the league. So there's plenty of expectation for this Baltimore offense. You're probably getting Odell back. You're definitely getting Bateman back. They confirmed Bateman already. I think Odell's still unconfirmed last I saw. Oh, seriously? This is limited on... That's going to be annoying. Can I at least click from one to the other? I had a depth chart screen up here that I was going to use to pull up notes quickly, but apparently it only shows a limited subset unless you're a subscriber, which is a pain in the ass. But I can still click from one team to the other, so I think I can still do it faster than typing it in. Still listed as questionable as of the last update, which is where I thought we were. On the Pittsburgh side of things, I don't really love the quarterback. We talked a little bit of Kenny Pickett yesterday. We'll talk about him again in a sec. The skill players are okay. I think Pickens has talent. Both running backs have talent. Najee hasn't been nearly as bad as it may seem like. Calvin seems okay. Allen Robinson probably at the end of the line here, and that's kind of it there. But it all revolves around the play of Pickett. It's kind of similar to Atlanta with the play of Ritter. I think just the quarterbacks in some of these situations can kind of drag down their skill players, and it's not a situation where Pickens is going to be able to float Pickett. It only works in one direction. I mean, yeah, these guys can make incredible catches on bad passes and so on to help out a little bit, but overall, you're not going to get that uptick. You're not going to get that rising tide effect just because a position player, a skill player projects well. So it's just kind of limited with offenses like this, and they're going up against such a good defense. First against the pass, 4.1 yards per pass attempt. Seventh, 3.8 yards per rush attempt. With a multi-headed backfield that's kind of split early downs, passing downs. It's kind of split down the middle. Neither guy really standing out. Both guys, some explosive run capability. But if one of them had the reins on the job, they might be interesting. But again, not against this defense. So I don't love the Pittsburgh side. To get into the situations of it all. So we all know who Lamar is and what Lamar does. He's going to be running the ball. We'll start there. 10.3 rushing attempts per game, already 220 yards on the season, 5.4 yards per rush attempt, and he's gotten the ball in the end zone 4 times on the ground already. That's what you need. You need some of that skill set to come through to really pay him off. We were talking about the, Matthew Patterson's mentioned, we were talking about the turnover problem with Lamar in a slow-paced game. Could be a bit of an issue. NFL lineup alert, Ramondre Stevenson expected to play. Good, because I did not realize he was not expected to play. So that's a plus. So yeah, Lamar, we were looking at the fumbles yesterday. Where is it? 2 fumbles in 3 games, 3 of the 4 games, and lost one of the 2 in each of those games, which is not great. He's only thrown 1 interception, threw an interception week 1, but the fumbles are concerning, especially when he's going to have the ball in his hands that much, be running the ball that much. That's kind of a concern if he's putting it on the ground, but not so much that it's going to really take us away from playing Lamar Jackson. He's he's potentially dominant slate-winning type of a quarterback. Going up against a defense that's only gaining pressure 19% of the time, despite a 31% blitz rate. 15 sacks, 4 picks so far for them, so they're not incapable of getting to the quarterback, but they're not gaining pressure a ton of the time, and he can always break one off if they try to. 19 of 26 on average, 74% of his passes. He's completed 4 touchdown passes on the season, only the 1 interception. 6.8 intended air yards per attempt. Matches the total by Kenny Pickett, but Pickett's been a lot less effective overall. Well, technically, through the air, it's not all that different. Pickett's thrown 4 interceptions to Lamar's 1. They've both thrown 4 touchdowns. Pickett's technically gaining 2 and change yards more per game, but 61% of a completion rate versus 74% completion rate is a big difference. The intended air yards versus the completed air yards is a big difference. And obviously the rushing game. And he's going up against the defense that's pressuring the quarterback 24% of the time. They've got 12 sacks already. They've allowed only 3 defensive passing touchdowns, where Pittsburgh's allowed 8 defensive passing touchdowns and 254 yards a game, 6.5 yards per pass attempt. So a lot of opportunity for Lamar. On the ground, none of these guys rank out well at all. A lot of middling options. We could give Gus a little bit more in terms of expected touches, given that he got 69% of the snaps last week. Even split, basically, between the Steelers running backs. On the average, Najee's getting a few more. Najee's getting most of the early downs. Jaylen Warren's coming in on later downs. Warren's getting 5.5 targets a game. Najee's only getting 2 targets a game. Warren's catching 4.5 of them. He's gotten a red zone target so far. Has not gotten in on the ground. Neither has Najee. Neither of those things are great. What do you mean you didn't find it? How do you not find the word Najee? It's only in there once, I'm sure. There it is. Last time out, 17 touches, 84 yards for Najee. 53.5 yards a game on 12.5 touches for Jaylen Warren. Just tough when it's that evenly split and that stark in terms of the roles. On the Baltimore side, it's primarily Gus Edwards' job, and then a few touches for Justice Hill, a few touches for Melvin Gordon. Justice Hill's the more interesting, the more dynamic of those two guys, but he's seeing fewer opportunities. That said, he scored twice on the ground so far. But 7.3 rush attempts per game, 6.5 for Melvin Gordon, but he's played fewer. Yards per rush attempt, 3.8 versus 4.1. These guys are super limited. It's Gus if you want to go to this offense on the ground, but really, I'm just looking to Lamar and the passing game. I don't really think I want to go to this game very much for rushing. Just especially, with this with this rush defense. This rush defense you can target a little bit, but I just don't like our options all that much. Edwards ranks 13th in explosive run rate, if you care about explosive run rate. It's about all that's interesting about Gus Edwards. 1.3 yards after contact, 3.1 yards before contact. He scored once so far, 4.4 yards per rush attempt. 11 carries a game for 48 yards. Last week it was 17 total touches for the same total yards. Not targeted in the passing attack. They don't target any of these guys, really. Getting into that passing attack a little bit. Mark Andrews, Zay Flowers, kind of the primaries. Andrews ranks out very well. 4th overall tight end on DK by points. Same on FanDuel. 8th by point per dollar and 11th on FanDuel by point per dollar. So not great in terms of the value rating, but it's just a strong positional fantasy score to plug into that tight end spot that's so limited and so limiting in lineups. Andrews is getting first read looks on 20.7% of his routes run. This is what we've added. Last week played 69% of the snaps, ran routes on 53% of those. This isn't a routes run per drop back. It's just routes run on the snaps, on the percentage of snaps. Not perfect, but we'll deal with it. On the 53% routes that he ran on his snaps, he was targeted on 24% of those, putting up 3.8 yards per target. 6 targets a game is what it amounts to, 17.6% of the total target share. He's getting out targeted by Zay pretty significantly, 28.4% target share on the season for Zay, 24% target share on his routes. Last week he just was out there way more. He's out there for 98% of the snaps. He ran routes on basically half of the entire team snaps. Drew 15% targets on the routes. Last week, 24% on average. Amounts to 7 targets a game. Red zone targets, I should probably move red zone targets back on the other side of the board. It was different when this was further up the other side. He's seen 5 red zone targets to Andrews' 3. I expect over the course of the season that'll normalize and Andrews will have more. Zay seeing in a 6.1 yard A-dot, not really a primary downfield operator. If Odell's back, he can step into that role a little bit. He was drawing 13.7% of the air yard share in his starts. 11.1 yard A-dot, putting up 9.4 yards per target, 2.5 catches a game, only 4 targets a game, 6.9% of the target volume overall. I think we temper expectations, but maybe as a home run type option, especially if he's on something of a snap count coming back from injury. Rashad Bateman also coming back from injury. He's only drawing 8.8% of the targets. That amounts to 3 a game. 16% of his routes run, and he runs routes basically half the time that he's out there. So it's a strong 1-2 in Mark Andrews and Zay Flowers. And then it's just mix and match guys through these two. And you're not going to much downboard. Devin Duvernay basically off the table this week with the return of these two guys. If Odell doesn't come back, maybe he creeps in for a couple of looks. Maybe it's Nelson Aguilar. But neither one of these guys is worth all that much consideration. Likely only if Andrews got hurt in that event, he would become a good option like he was in week 1, where we got burnt by him. Polanco 3-run bomb. Ooh. Lone Wolf's here. Oh. Oh, so it was Polanco and then Royce Lewis, too? Damn. I should probably flip that back onto the TV. I got sidetracked, like I said. I got sidetracked into watching Empire Strikes Back. It's one channel down. It's on FX. That's one channel down from TBS, where that game is. Oh, no, that's the Phillies-Braves game. That's on TBS. Where is that game? Fox Sports. Yeah, there it is. All right. Got a game in Houston. That's probably not good for our pal Dennis's lineups, unfortunately. Assuming Verlander's still in. That does not look like Justin Verlander. Oh, we're in the 7th. So Verlander's just, that all came off of Abreu? It's a good reliever. Anyway, no time to waste on that. Remember when I said that the show would go quicker? Who am I kidding? There's an upper deck shot by Jorge Polanco? Damn. I gotta watch that. Getting into the Pittsburgh side of the equation. Excuse me. Pickens does rank out okay for the money. 17th by value on DK, 18th by value on FanDuel, 14th by raw fantasy point projection. So he's not off the table by any means, but it's just going up against a pretty good defense. I don't really see the need to target these guys. Why is this one divided and that one's not? This is the shit that I hate when I don't grab it for the whole column. Hold on. Let me just fix that real quick. I wanted that to be per game. But sometimes you forget to copy it down the entire column. Back to the action. So Pickens is playable, especially if you're going to pick it. But I do think that in small doses, at the very least, as a last receiver in, I think Pickens is somewhat playable. He's out there for 98% of the snaps last week, 90% on average. He runs routes on half of those. He's targeted 24% of the routes that he runs. It amounts to 8 targets a game, 23.4% of their overall targets. They're also going to be out there without Pat Freiermuth and with no real reasonable replacement at the tight end position. So I just expect more looks for Pickens, Austin, and Robinson. I don't know what it amounts to given who's throwing them the ball, but I think it does probably lead to a few additional looks, especially for their primary first read option. 10-yard A-dot. Yeah, these two guys, they're stupid numbers. 12.2 for Calvin and 6.1 for Allen Robinson. So between Pickens and Austin, you're getting your downfield shots. Allen Robinson just kind of operating near the line of scrimmage, playing 85% of the snaps, running routes on a little over half of the 85% of the snaps, but only drawing 8% targets per route run. Kind of limiting. Putting up 0.3 yards per route run last game, 0.9 yards per route run on the season. Pickens is at least giving you 2 yards per route run on the season, 0.9 last week. Not great. He's putting up 65 yards a game. He scored once through the air. He's got the same amount of receiving touchdowns as Nelson Aguilar does on the other side. Kind of limited. Red zone targets. He's seen 3 looks in the red zone. Converted 1 of them. So, as if to just ram the point home, I do not like the Pittsburgh passing attack all that much. I could definitely get invested in some Mark Andrews and Zay Flowers. If I'm going over the top with shares of Lamar, which it sounds enticing if he's truly going to be low owned, I'll definitely come up with some Odell and some Rashad Bateman. If those guys are both playing, if they're both relatively full go, I think you can mix and match them in, but you see where they rank. It's not like they're overly strong plays. These two guys I like a lot better. Mark Andrews specifically is very interesting at the tight end position. Did I miss anything important in these notes? Since Deontay went down, Pickens drawing 40% air yard share. His air yard share on the season was probably similar. 9%. That doesn't make sense. How could that be 9%? How could that number have been so wrong? Do I have that looking up in the right spot? This is one of the new columns. Hold on. Let me make sure I got the lookup right. A to J is... This is the exciting stuff on the shows. It's the full season. Team air yard share. Well, somebody got that stat wrong. Not sure whether it was the article I pulled it from or that board that we're looking at. Hopefully it was the article. So ignore what I just said about the air yard share since Deontay went down. It seems like it sounded right. I mean, I can't imagine where it's going, and given the average depth of target, it's probably right. Putting up 18.8 air yards per catch. Calvin putting up 21.3. Either way, I mean, we all know he's been their primary receiver since Deontay went down, and Deontay didn't really do anything in his first 2 games before he went down. I think we can move on. That's enough time spent on the Pittsburgh passing game, eh? Much more interesting one here. Carolina, Detroit. We were talking about this one up the top. I took Jahmyr Gibbs out for Detroit. He came up as doubtful. So I just lifted him out. Montgomery benefits a little bit. I took Amon-Ra out for Detroit. He's also doubtful. Josh Reynolds benefits quite a bit. Khalif Raymond benefits a little bit. Hopefully Jamison Williams benefits a lot because I plan on playing him, assuming that he's going to play. Even if he's on a snap count, I think he's super interesting. So I'm going there. Marvin Jones is a real question mark, but he's got to have a little bit of a projection. We got to expect, the ball's going to be flying around. And then Sam Laporta obviously remains incredibly interesting. I was on him before any changes in this offense. But I think I'm still going to go here. Goff still projects out pretty well. Montgomery projects out very, very well now. He looks like a really strong option across sites. Laporta looks like a strong option. If anything, I think the absences, losing Amon-Ra sucks. He's by far their best weapon through the air. But at least it makes it a little bit more focused. It takes away a couple of now I know that Montgomery's just going to get the ball. Laporta is going to be a key, obviously. And then it's a little bit split in the wide receiver core, but I've got a premium talent here that might go a little bit underappreciated pending what the news looks like. And then I feel like these guys will be not guys that the public's going to get really, really over the top about, even with a little bit of value on their side. So I just kind of think it creates some opportunity around that Detroit offense where maybe it didn't exist previously. Going up against the Carolina defense, allowing 4.7 yards per rush attempt, 6.4 yards per pass attempt. Those rank 29th on the ground and 17th through the air. Very targetable defense here. The question I think just came up in the chat, and I totally agree. My big issue, and I was talking about it on the show yesterday, is does Carolina hang with this Detroit team? Detroit ranks second against the rush, 3 yards per rush attempt, 8th against the pass, 5.7 yards per pass attempt. Bryce Young hasn't really done much so far in the NFL, doesn't project very well. Adam Thielen has shown a little bit of life. Miles Sanders and Chuba Hubbard are basically splitting that running back job. Sanders has been banged up with a groin injury, but is expected to play. It's kind of like a 60-40 split with neither guy really distinguishing himself. And then your other receivers, DJ Shark, Jonathan Mingo. It is a very limited Carolina team. I expect Detroit to wax this team. It's just, can they hang in there through the entire first half even, so that Detroit feels compelled to score 28 to 35 points. Hopefully you get more than that. Hopefully Carolina does hang in there. But yeah, that's really where I get concerned. Trey says maybe it's a get 2 lines in the winning lineup, D. Montgomery, and a pass game option. Yeah, I'm totally fine with playing Montgomery as a part of that stack, considering the volume that I expect him to get. I think that makes a ton of sense. So yeah, I'm good with Goff plus 1, 2, Goff plus 1, 2, Goff plus 1, 2, etc., etc. These two, him and anybody, him and anybody. Pending news again, I'll begrudgingly probably even throw a couple Marvin darts if I gotta. Trey says, kind of like Goff, always better at home. Well, Carolina. So it was Trey that asked if Carolina was going to push them enough. Yeah, that's my big thing. Trey smoking some Gary Payton right now. I'm still working on my bunches of fresh powder that I grabbed a couple weeks ago that I mentioned. I typically stock up when I go, since I've got to Uber over to the dispensary and then Uber back. It's kind of a tax on my dispensary trips. So I try and just stock up when I go. Only have to go every few weeks. So let's get into this one. Keep this thing rolling. Mr. Goff, big time. QB4 on DK by points, QB2 by value. 4 and 5 on the FanDuel slate. Projecting for a big game. Defense giving up 5.8 yards per pass attempt, 176 yards per game on the season. Allowed 4 touchdowns already through the air. Detroit's actually allowed 5. 219 yards. But Detroit gaining pressure 27% of the time. 13 sacks already. Bryce Young going to be running for his life out there. I really like this Detroit defense to kind of go out there and have a day. Overall, both throwing the ball a fair amount of the time. 32 pass attempts per game for Goff. 34 for Bryce Young. Completing less than 70%. Bryce Young significantly less than 70%. Goff right about 257 yards a game. He's thrown 6 touchdowns already. 7.5 intended air yards per attempt. Completing 5.3 air yards per attempt. Bryce Young, this is where we get problematic. 6.4 intended and only completing 2.7 in air yards per attempt. So most of the things that he's completed for 167 yards a game, most of his 65% of his completion, 65% completion rate, 22 a game, comes in short yardage, comes for limited gains. He's only gone 20 yards twice. That is a limited quarterback. That is a quarterback being managed in what he's allowed to do out there. Hasn't thrown the ball over 30 yards all season. Thrown the ball 7 times in the red zone in 4 games. They're not in the red zone that much. I guess there's that. But he's only thrown the ball 7 times in the red zone. It's not great. Neither one of these guys is really a threat on the ground other than the up and over type play. Really like the opportunity for Jared Goff. From yesterday's notes, Goff at least 1 passing touchdown in each game. He had 3 with 323 yards in week 2. In each of the other ones, he had only 1 with mid-200s yardage, but again, averaging 257 yards, I think it was. Nothing else overly compelling. Excellent at throwing the ball deep against a team that's allowing a 10.3 yard defensive ADOT. That's another kind of compelling number there. Bryce Young going up against the team allowing an 8.4 yard ADOT, but again, just not throwing the ball deep. He's not going to take any shots. He's not really racking up any yards. He doesn't have that great of a receiving core to work with. Doesn't have that great of an offensive line to keep him upright for all that long. On the ground, as mentioned, kind of a split between these guys now. Last week, Chuba jumped up to 54% of the snaps on the average for the season. He's at 40%. Miles Sanders, 43% last week, 57% on average. Carrying the ball 13.5 times a game to Chuba Hubbard 6.5 times a game. Each of the first 4 weeks, Hubbard was below 40%. That holds up with his average that I just mentioned. Going up against a good rush defense. Gaining for Sanders 1.6 yards before contact, 1.4 yards after. Hubbard not that much better. A little bit better after contact at 2.8. 4.6 yards per rush attempt, but not carrying the ball all that much. Last week, he touched the ball with his increased snap count. He touched the ball 16 times. He put up... I forgot I wasn't going to type. Oh, well. He carried it 14 times for 41. Caught 2 targets for 12. That's it. Maybe you get that game from him again. Maybe you get the same game from Miles Sanders, and you're kind of split between the two. Either one of them is entirely touchdown dependent, I would think. 17th and 15th on DK, 17th and 16th on FanDuel for Sanders, and worse for Chuba Hubbard. David Montgomery becomes a beast, like I said. Jumps up to second on the DK slate by raw points, third by value, second and fourth. Ignore Jahmyr Gibbs. He's just in here because I didn't take him out after I updated it, but I did drop his projection. I did update the rankings. Craig Reynolds, just a minor bump. I just expect all the snaps going to go David Montgomery's way. Reynolds not untalented back there, but just Montgomery's been good. I don't see any reason they wouldn't look his direction, just significantly more. He has... Did I document anything for him? I didn't, but we've got it right here. 87.3 yards per game on 23 carries. Seeing 71%. Saw 71% of the snaps last week, 65% on average. So say this trends up to even just 75%. We're seeing a pretty nice little uptick in rush attempts. Get him up into that 100-yard range. Get him up into the end zone. He's got 5 touchdowns already this year. 2.4 yards before contact. Not targeted. Not really in there for passing downs, but you know, got at least a little bit of potential to maybe pick up a couple catches. Definitely excited about the spot for Montgomery. And then we get into the passing game. On the Carolina side, just to knock them out real quick, nobody ranks above 15th, where Adam Thielen is. He's just kind of a middling option. 13th on the FanDuel slate, but 22nd by value. 16th by value on DK. He's seeing 90% of the snaps. He's running routes out of the slot. 51% routes run on his 90% snaps. Seeing targets on 26% of those routes run, or last week anyway, 21% on average. Putting up 2.5 yards per route run last week, 1.9 yards on average. 8 targets a game versus the 5 targets a game going DJ Shark's direction. 2 receiving touchdowns for Thielen, 1 for DJ Shark. Shark getting more of the air yards, 16.4 yard average depth of target, 11.6% of the air yards. Mingo, 8.4% of the air yards, 12.5 yard average depth of target, drawing 6 targets a game. He didn't go last week. He was banged up. I believe he's still questionable this week. But once we start getting into the down depth chart options on the Panthers, I become less and less interested. Mingo is... no injury designation, excuse me. He had a concussion week 3, but he's off the injury report. So should be back into that kind of a role. On average, running routes 60% of the time that he's out there. He's out there for 70% of the snaps, and he's targeted on 22% of that 60% of the routes that he runs, but only putting up 0.7 yards per route run. 3.37 yards per target. Red zone targets, it's just been the Adam Thielen show with Hayden Hurst drawing a couple. Hurst kind of limited at the tight end position, draw an okay point per dollar number because he's only 3,100, but another guy who's just touchdown dependent. Out there for half the snaps, runs routes on 64% of the snaps that he sees, but we're talking about a limited option. He was targeted on 14% of the 64% routes that he ran. Put up 0.3 yards per route run last week, 0.7 yards per route run for the season. 4 targets a game. He's gotten in the end zone once. They will look his direction if they happen to get in the red zone. It's just, are they going to work the ball down? Are they going to have those opportunities? It becomes very thin once we start compounding these things. A lot going on in the chat. Beantown likes Cook over Brees. He gets all the red zone touches. I know it's Cook, but a low-owned Cook over a moderately owned hole seems enticing. A lot of coach speak this week about Brees taking over the reins. That's kind of my my linchpin with that. With Cook not being all that good anyway, and with a lot of coach speak about this is the week we unleash Brees, who's been getting really limited touches and doing a lot with them. That's where I get a little concerned. We'll get into that one. On the Detroit passing game, Laporta probably becomes the nominal one in this passing attack, even though he's the tight end. He's been out there for 80% of the snaps on average, 80% last week. Runs routes on 37% of those snaps, 44% on average. Targeted 28% of the time on average on the routes that he runs. It amounts to 7 targets a game. I expect that'll tick up to the 10 range with Amon-Ra out. Amon-Ra is doubtful to play, so technically still a chance, but seems like all signs are that he's not going to go. All signs are Jahmyr Gibbs not going to go. 1 touchdown so far for Laporta. It's the one thing he hasn't really put up that much. But overall, he's been a target hog. 21.8% of the overall targets. A 6.4 yard ADOT, 8.96 yards per target, 7.9 yard air yards per target, or per catch rather. Already targeted twice in the red zone. He converted one of them. I lost track of where the hell the yards per game is. 4.4 yards per game on 5.5 receptions. A very, very good tight end. Reynolds probably becomes the number 2 overall and the number 1 wide receiver target. He's seen 73% of the snaps basically on this season. Running routes on essentially half the snaps that he's out there for. See an uptick in that. Targeted 25% of the time last week. So we expect that that'll probably go up a little bit or at least be maintained. On average, 19%. 2.99 yards per route run last week with a 2.2 yard per route run average. Not bad. 6 targets a game overall, 15% of the volume. Should expect that that'll tick up. 4 catches a game. Got the opportunity to do a little bit more. If we bump that up, give him 7 catches, does he get into the 75 yards? Potentially a shot at the end zone? Absolutely. In an offense that we like, he's already been targeted twice in the red zone. Again, primarily playing with Amon-Ra. Khalif Raymond. Now we're getting downboard a little bit. Wide receiver 35 by raw fantasy point projection, but he only costs 3,300. He becomes wide receiver 6 by value on DK. 31st and 14th for 4,800 on the FanDuel board. Not that he projects well, but given the idea of some opportunity, he's been out there. He was out there 23% of the time last week, 32% on average. When he's out there, he runs routes. Runs routes 69% of the time that he's on the field, but only targeted 9% of the time last week on those. On average, he's targeted 21% of the time he runs a route, which is a little bit better, obviously. And he gives us 2.3 yards per route run. It's only 3 targets a game overall. Bump that up to 5, 6. Maybe he does something with it. But now you do have Jameson as a question mark here, coming off of his suspension. That's the big question mark. What does his snap number look like? What does his routes run look like? And I don't know that we can answer that. What we can do, hopefully, possibly, let's get to his... Right. In the 6 games that we had him for. The hell is it? Targeted on 26.5% of the routes that he ran. .7 yard ADOT. Just trying to parse these stats as I'm saying it. This is last year, by the way. Nine total targets. 4.6 yards per target. Ran the ball once for 40 yards. One catch for 41 yards and a touchdown. Is that all we got? Well, Matt Patterson, Bijan, just far pricey. Oh, I like Bijan. I like that spot a lot. Top running back on the board for us today. So Jameson is the big question mark in this offense right now. If he doesn't go, because he is currently listed as questionable, do you get to Marvin? You've got Khalif Raymond. Did I talk about Khalif Raymond? I did, yeah. Marvin last time ran 9 routes in week 4. Ran 10 routes the week before that. Played 25 snaps in week 3, 20 snaps in week 4. All actually in the offense, not on special teams, which is a plus for a very down depth chart receiver. But probably needs Jameson not to play to be all that relevant. A total dart throw, even if that's the situation. Really like these options, assuming that Jameson plays. Keep this thing in gear. Now we're on the Cincy, Arizona game that people were talking about at the top of the show. Matthew Patterson has a ton of Connor. Yeah, I do think that Connor's going to be a playable piece of this slate. I do like that Arizona offense. He projects out fairly well. 44.5 point total. I kind of just prefer getting to Dobbs in the receiving game, but I think that's the direction a lot of people are going. So I'm kind of happy to embrace the Connor of it, if that is the case. Going up against a defense allowing 5.1 yards per rush attempt, 30th ranked overall. 6.9 yards per pass attempt, 22nd ranked overall. This could be a pretty decent opportunity for a shootout. You've got a supposedly improving health-wise Joe Burrow on this side. No T. Higgins. We took him out of the projections. Josh Dobbs playing better than expected, I think is fair. Well, might be a little bit extreme, but definitely better than expected. With some capable receivers in Marquise Brown. Michael Wilson has taken a big step forward over the last 3 weeks. Zach Ertz still capable at the tight end spot. Rondale Moore not totally shot. But yeah, Connor's a big part of the plans here, I think. Obviously on this side, you've got Jamar. Major weapon. Opportunity for Tyler Boyd to step forward and kind of start producing this season. Joe Mixon definitely will be involved. Sees opportunities through the air, on the ground. Hasn't had many, outbursts so far this season, but still a capable enough guy. With the idea that T. Higgins' looks and touches are going to have to go in different directions, I think Joe Mixon sees a bit of an uptick. Trenton Irwin minorly on the board. The tight end position is a mess on this team right now. Irv, I think, do we have Irv fully, is Irv on the injury report? I should start highlighting these things with colors. Just give myself more to do. Irv is not on the injury report. So presumably Irv steps back and becomes the number 1 tight end, which holds up with the projection that we've got on him. Just not a great position with this team. Andreas Sovis potentially sees a few targets. He saw... Last time out, Trenton Irwin saw 16, ran 16 routes. Cyrus ran 6 routes. So potentially a little bit of a roll bump. Obviously, you're way down depth chart with these options. These are not good options. But potentially if he's going to be out there running a couple of additional routes, then maybe. Yeah, don't worry, Greg. We're going into the player-by-player portion of it. That was just kind of the overview part. Wilson for Arizona. We'll get there. Too much to do. I've got to make this so that these adjust automatically. There's got to be a way to do that. If I just select the game back there, have it select over here. Yet another thing to work on. QB7 for Burrow on both sites. Jumps to 6th on FanDuel by point per dollar. Dobbs 5th on DK point per dollar. 7th on FanDuel point per dollar. Pretty good projection for Josh Dobbs. 207.25 yards per game. He's thrown 6 touchdown passes. Going up against a team that allows 7.8 yard defensive ADOT. Same thing on the other side. Both teams can gain pressure. 22.4% pressure rate for Cincinnati against Dobbs. 29.5% for Arizona against Joe Burrow. If we think of Joe Burrow in terms of being limited by the calf, potentially the pressure could be a problem. But I'm going with the reports that say that he's looking better. Eventually, these things do heal. It's been super limiting to him so far. We talked about it yesterday. Did not throw the ball more than 20 yards in week 4. He was 20 of 30 for 165 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions in week 4. He's thrown 2 touchdowns on the season, 2 interceptions, 6.1 intended air yards per attempt, completing 2.5 air yards per attempt. It's just not Joe Burrow so far. Look at all the underneath work, limited downfield work. 15 attempts in the red zone, only 2 touchdown passes. It's not great. 17 attempts so far for Josh Dobbs, 4 touchdowns on the season, putting up 7.9 intended air yards per attempt, completing 4.6 of them. He's run the ball in once, running just 6 times a game, 141 rush yards so far. In week 4, he was 28 of 41 for 265 yards, 2 touchdowns. He carried the ball 12 times for 48 yards. In week 3, he carried the ball 6 times for 55 yards. And then in week 3, he carried the ball just 3 times, but went for 41 yards and that rushing touchdown. So a capable rusher, not the primary focus, but in addition to his like mid-grade passing, he's like a mid-grade quarterback runner too. So you get a little bit of bonus fantasy points potentially. On the ground, both running backs are on the board for sure. Connor, as people were discussing, 12th by DK raw points, 7th by point per dollar, 11th and 5th on the FanDuel slate. But on the other side, Joe Mixon, 8th and 12th on DK, 10th and 11th on FanDuel. I think they're both involved. Both these defenses can get gouged by running backs for sure. 157 yards a game being given up by Cincinnati, 132 yards a game being given up by Arizona. 1.75 rush touchdowns a game given up by Arizona. Definitely something that can be exploited by Joe Mixon. He's seeing 79% of the snaps in that backfield. Obviously the featured back. He's only scored once, 14.75 carries a game though. Plenty of volume. Also supported in the pass game by another 3 targets a game. So we're talking about roughly 17 touches, somewhere in that neighborhood. 4.2 yards per rush attempt. Still a capable runner. 2.2 yards before contact, 2 yards after contact per attempt. Been targeted once in the red zone. James Conner on the other side been targeted twice in the red zone. He draws 2.5 targets a game. 3.9 yards before contact per rush attempt. It's tremendous. 1.2 yards after contact. Not nearly as good. He's gotten in twice, putting up 5.1 yards per rush attempt, carrying the ball 15.5 times a game. 62% of the snaps. And nothing critical in that note. Yeah, so Connor's on the board firmly. Joe Mixon also very much on the board. Keontae Ingram, I believe, is questionable. Didn't go last week. Uptick in carries for, or in snaps anyway, for Amari DeMarcado. 35% of the snaps up from 22%. Kind of an afterthought, though. 38th, 37th on DK, 37th, 34th on the FanDuel slate. And you still might get Ingram in there. Same story with these guys, just afterthoughts in the rushing game. It's just the primaries from this team, or from these two teams. In the passing game, We can start with Michael Wilson that somebody asked about. 37 hundo. Ranks 34th by raw points, but 15th by point per dollar on DK. Pretty good. They haven't really increased his price for the increased roll. On FanDuel, he's gone up 5,300. Ranks 33rd and 25th. He's seeing 70% of the snaps last week. On average now he's up to 68%. Running routes on 71% of the snaps that he sees. So he's out there running a decent amount of routes. Marquise running routes on 73% of basically all the snaps. They're both getting targeted when they run routes. 21% targets per route run last week for Marquise. 20% for Michael Wilson. And then Zach Ertz is out there running routes. Basically 80% of the time he's out there 75% of the time. 80% of that he's running routes. And 25% of that he's getting targeted. 1.3 yards per route run last week. 2.2 for Mike Wilson. 2 for Marquise. Overall, it boils down to 8 targets a game for both Zach Ertz and Marquise. 4 targets a game on average for Michael Wilson, but he's been trending up. Wilson. All this clicking. $29 routes run in week 1, targeted on 13.8% of those. 17 routes run in week 2, targeted on 17.6%. Up to 20 routes run in week 3, targeted on just 10% of them. Only 2 targets in week 3. Caught them both for 86 yards. And then a monster last week. Caught 7 of 7 on 36 routes. That's a 19.4% target share on routes run. Caught 7 of 7 for 76 yards and 2 touchdowns. Still probably a little bit touchdown dependent. Still does have Rondale hanging out there. Rondale saw 76% of the snaps last week. He ran a route on 75% of those, but he was only targeted on 5% of the routes that he ran. If that flips, if Rondale sees more of the targets because everybody's expecting it to go the other way, he could definitely creep into relevance at low ownership. Over the first 3 weeks, Rondale ran 29 routes, targeted on 10%, 20 routes, targeted on 5%, and then in week 3, he ran 19 routes, was targeted on 31% of those routes. Caught 4 of 8. Oh, excuse me. Caught 4 of 6 for 8 yards. Not a great game. 0.42 yards per route run. Week 1 was his best in terms of yards per route run. He ran 29 routes, put up a 1.14 yards per route run. There's a reason that he's losing that job to Michael Wilson, or lost that job already. Marquise between the wideouts, still the focal point, I think. Drawing 8 targets a game, 26.4% of the volume overall. 2 receiving touchdowns so far, matches Michael Wilson's total from last week. An 11.8 yard ADOT, 13.3 yard ADOT for Wilson. 4 red zone targets for Marquise so far, considering that he's targeted more so far or similarly than the tight end. 5 targets in the red zone for Zach Ertz. He still sees plenty of volume. Still can do a decent amount with it. 1.3 yards per route run. Not a depth monster by any means, but the idea that he's got upside for a touchdown, upside for 2 touchdowns, I would never mind going to premium tight ends in offenses like this. 9th ranked on DK by raw points. 3rd by point per dollar because he only cost 3,500. 4th on FanDuel point per dollar at 5,100. Zach Ertz for 3,500 just sounds wrong in my head. On the Cincinnati side, Jamar, the premium option, 3rd overall on the board for wide receivers on both sites. 14th because he costs 7,900 point per dollar on DK. That's quite a bit less expensive than the guys on the other side, or quite a bit more expensive, rather. The guys on the other side. 8,700 on the FanDuel slate, ranks him 4th by point per dollar, 3rd overall by raw fantasy points. A routes monster, a targets monster, a talent monster. Drawing 10 targets a game, 28.7% of the target volume overall. Going to be operating without his counterpart, without T. Higgins out there. But he'll have Boyd, he'll have, to whatever extent, Trent Irwin. But he'll have Boyd Should be an uptick in targets for Boyd. He's drawing 18.9% of the targets, 7 a game, but not really doing a lot. 0.9 yards per route run. 1.8 yards per route run for Jamar Chase. Last week it was 2.1. Boyd targeted 19% of the time when he runs a route. Chase targeted 26% of the time when he runs a route. Big, big differences. Chase 5 targets in the red zone already. Boyd just the 1. No receiving touchdowns between either of these guys, but this receiving core has just been more limited by Joe Burrow this year than anything else. Irwin and Iosavas we kind of touched on real quick. They both ran a couple of routes last week. There's the idea that they might run a couple of additional routes this week, but both of those guys are extreme dart throws at best. They don't project well, and they will not project well by the time you use this tomorrow. They're not going to increase all that much beyond where they already are, if they increase at all. Irv Smith, a playable tight end. Not a great option. Didn't play last week. 65% of the snaps on average. Runs routes 70% of those snaps. 15% target share when he's running a route. 5 targets a game. 4.6% of the air yards. 4.7 yard ADOT. Not a downfield tight end by any means. Got 1 look in the red zone already. Touchdown dependent tight end. He's cheap if nothing else. 3,100 does put him on the board. But even with that, still only tight end 11 by value. No options really down here. You're going to come up with a way to like cap the games. Like, I don't like the idea of just like ranking the players again. But like with baseball, we've got that get out where, all right, let me put these 4 corners in order. And it's a good way to get out of these games. Instead of just being like, all right, time to move on. Which is what I'm doing now. Houston, Atlanta. Matthew Patterson's out of here. Have a great night, everyone. Good luck. Remember to hammer the Niners -3.5 against the Cowboys. Interesting. Vic. What's up, Vic? Vic getting here a little bit late. What's going on, buddy? Plenty of time to rewind and re-listen before the slate locks tomorrow. Trey says Cincinnati 5.1 yards per carry run defense. Yeah, did I miss that? Did I say that wrong? It's possible. Yeah, we looked at that. Neither of those teams is good on defense. It's kind of why I like that game. 4.4 yards per pass attempt or per rush attempt on the ground for Arizona. 5.1 yards per rush attempt on the ground for Cincinnati. Ranks 30th, ranks 23rd. 29th ranked and 22nd ranked through the air. Good idea of offense in this game. 44.5 point total. I like it. Back to Houston and Atlanta. So this is another one where it's just, I think this team is just a mess because of this quarterback. I like the skill players here. I like Drake London. I like Kyle Pitts. Bijan projects out great anyway and is definitely a go-to for me this week. But these other skill players are really limited by this quarterback. 42 point total. Atlanta favored by 1. The idea of kind of like a low-scoring, couple of touchdowns on each side, kind of a fist fight type game. Not a shootout, but a little bit of a fist fight type game. I could see that coming together here, kind of around some good running from Bijan and then some decent quarterback play on the other side from CJ Stroud, who has been good so far. Has a couple of interesting weapons to work with in Nico, in Tank Dell, and in Robert Woods. And also, once they get in the red zone, I don't totally discount the Dalton Schultz thing. I think there's some opportunity there, given how many times they've looked his direction in the red zone already. Jake Swale says, Ritter, the worst starting quarterback in the league. Yeah. It's like Ritter, and then like way down below him, Daniel Jones. Go Giants. Yeah, no, Danny Dimes obviously is a little bit better than Ritter anyway. But yeah, I don't know that I disagree with that. I think it's probably accurate. Mid-show munchies for Trey. Red Baron pepperoni pizza and half a cheesesteak. Not bad. Vic's having lasagna with a salad and some garlic bread. That sounds pretty nice. I don't know what I got in the fridge. I think I got some salad makings in there. Probably going to have a big salad later on. I think that's the plan. Had some tacos last night. Made up some tacos. Pretty good. Just super basic. Old El Paso taco mix. A little bit of ground beef. Then just like cheese, salsa, the corn and black bean and corn salsa. Really good. And then some green olives. Solid dinner. Problem is you can't really buy that in appropriate amounts for one person. Nobody sells like a half pound of ground beef and 4 taco shells. Everybody sells like 10 taco shells and a pound of ground beef. There's a market out there for single share servings of all this shit. Like a loaf of bread. Sell me a loaf of bread with like that many slices in it, not this many slices in it. So that it doesn't go bad by the time I get to the bottom of it. It would be easier to keep my fridge stocked. Every time I go grocery shopping and actually like load up, shit just goes bad and it's a waste. Anyway, speaking of things being a waste and going bad, the Atlanta offense. Really not that into it outside of Bijan. Like I was saying, I like the skill players there, but it's just this guy. It's kind of crippling. Doesn't project out well at all. 17th and 16th on DK. 17th, 17th on the FanDuel slate. 195 yards a game allowed through the air for Houston. 2 touchdowns so far through the air. 5.9 yard defensive ADOT. Gaining pressure 23% of the time. On the other side, Atlanta does gain pressure. 32.1% pressure rate. 16 sacks. With the idea that maybe they get to CJ Stroud. We hit on this a little bit last night. Even with Stroud playing well, there is the notion that a little bit of pass rush from Atlanta could go a long way against that Houston offensive line. He's been sacked, or they've generated 16 sacks already this season. So there's a little bit maybe in play for the Atlanta D. But overall, I prefer the Stroud side of it. Throwing the ball 37.5 times a game, 303 yards a game, 6 touchdowns, yet to throw an interception. 8 intended air yards per attempt, completing 4.6 in air yards per attempt. On the other side, Ritter, 7.2 intended, but only getting about halfway there. That's not ideal. He's thrown the ball more than 40 yards once. Got a lot of downfield looks for CJ Stroud already. Just more weapons to work with. Neither one of these guys is going to be running the ball all that much. Ritter's run the ball in once, carrying the ball 3.5 times a game. Nothing overly relevant here. Greatly prefer the CJ Stroud side of it if we're talking about which of these quarterbacks to go to. On the ground, it's a different story. I don't really like the running game at all for Houston. Dameon Pierce, he ranks out okay by point per dollar. 6th on both sites by point per dollar, but 15th by raw fantasy points. A lot of times I'll just take the raw fantasy points at the running back position. So far this season, only 1.4 yards before contact per attempt, 1.5 yards after contact per attempt. He's gotten in the end zone once, 2.8 yards per rush attempt. He's carrying the ball 16 times a game. He's getting the volume. 59% of the snaps carrying the ball 16 times a game. That's a pretty good ratio. Targeted 2.75 times, catching it twice. So he's touching the ball essentially 18 times a game and really not giving us very much at all. Not a great option. I'm much more into the passing attack with Houston. On the other side, though, Bijan, 13 carries a game, something like 5 catches a game. Yeah, 5 catches a game, basically. So touches the ball essentially 18 times a game, putting up around 100 yards, 79.5 on the ground, giving us 6 yards per rush attempt. Only 1 touchdown on the season, oddly. That one he scored through the air in week 1. But just an absolute beast and just looks like a superstar out there. 4.2 yards before contact per rush attempt, 1.8 yards after contact. 30-yard run, 3 20-yard runs already at 38-yard long. 7.1 yards per catch. He's been targeted on the red zone twice. Tyler Allgeier's still there. He's seen his snaps go down week after week because of how good the kid is. Against what should be a pretty soft opponent on the ground. Is there the opportunity that Algier touches the ball a couple more times this week? Absolutely. He's already scored twice on the ground, 3.4 yards per rush attempt, carrying the ball 11.25 times a game. He was... I put a question in there. That's good. It's always good to put questions into your notes instead of answers. Good idea, dum-dum. Let's pull up the actual stats. Make this a little bit more worthwhile. I just want to see the week-by-week touches. Week 1, which was when he was relevant, he had the 2 touchdowns on the ground, carried the ball 15 times, 75 yards, 2 TDs. Was targeted 3 times, caught all 3 of them. And then in week 2, carried the ball 16 times, dropped to 48 yards, no touchdowns. Was not targeted, did not have any receptions. And then immediately week 3 down to 7 carries, 12 yards. Caught 2 of 3 targets for 17 yards. Last week, 7 carries, 16 yards. Caught 1 of 2 for -4 yards. So it's just a really diminishing role for a guy who's a talented back. That's the thing. So that's what keeps, kind of the thoughts of repeating that week 1 performance, probably not repeating it, but the 2 touchdown part of it is a little bit of a danger to Bijan's upside, but not much. Bijan is clearly the focal point there, clearly the featured back. As mentioned, I do like these 2 guys. A lot of talent there, but they're limited. They're kept in check by their quarterback. Getting Kyle Pitts' talent for $3,300 is valuable. It's a decent enough projection given how cheap he is. 8th overall by raw point projection, 2nd on DK by point per dollar. That's an interesting spot. He's 7th on the FanDuel board, point per dollar among tight ends. So not nearly as interesting from a value perspective. 6 guys rank ahead of him for value at a very limited tight end position. I'll have some. He's a good mixer. He's a good differentiator there. If he slips in popularity, I'll get to a little bit more, but it's not nearly the play that it looks like on the DK board. Drake London, just 22nd among wide receivers, 18th by value, 24th and 34th on FanDuel because he still costs $6,300 over there. London sees the majority of the snaps. 86% of the snaps last week, 87% on average. He runs a route 65% of those. Pitts runs a route 81% of the, let's do it this way, 70% on average of the 69% snaps that he sees. He's also got Jonnu Smith out there 62% of the time. Jonnu runs a route 54% of those. A little bit more involved for blocking, where Pitts is a little bit more of a receiver. That said, overall, it amounts to 17.2% of the target volume versus 18.1. Technically 5 targets apiece. 4 targets a game from Matt Collins. A limited downfield receiver, 14.6 yard ADOT, but hasn't exactly done a ton with it. 1.10 yards per route run so far. 1 yard per route run for Kyle Pitts. 1 yard per route run for Drake London on average. 2.1 for Jonnu Smith of all people. London's the only one who scored through the air outside of Bijan. Not a great passing attack here. Not a ton of reasons to go here. London dominating the red zone targets. He's got 6. Then Jonnu's got 3. It's not great news for Kyle Pitts that Jonnu's out targeting him in the red zone. Jonnu's only kind of a mix-in. He's very, very cheap. $2,900. You need the touchdown. You can throw the dart a couple times if you want, but I'm really limiting my expectations of the Atlanta passing game, and I'm really primarily limiting my Atlanta shares to the running back position. On this side, you can definitely get invested in 3 of these receivers, at least. 3 of the receivers and 4 of the pass catchers. I think Schultz is kind of interesting. $3,400 for a guy who's been targeted a handful of times already in the red zone. 4 targets in the red zone in 4 games. He's got 1 touchdown on the season. Only 2.5 catches a game. a 6.6 yard A dot, targeted 4 times a game. Only a 0.8 yards per route run. Only targeted on 16% of the 57% routes that he does run. A touchdown dependent, somewhat limited overall tight end, but a guy they have looked to for that touchdown. So I don't mind it. Again, on DK, a lot more interesting where he ranks 4th by value. On FanDuel, with 7 guys better for him than by value, including the guy that I just missed on the other side, I don't like it quite as much. But the 3 wide receivers are better. 16th, 17th, and 25th by raw points on DK. 15th, 16th, and 22nd on FanDuel. The value marks, not as good. You see a little bit of uptick in value for Robert Woods because he's very cheap, 4,000 and 5,000 across sites. He's out there for 78% of the snaps on average. He runs a route on 58% of those, and he is targeted on 24% of the routes that he's running. 1.5 yards per route run. Not great in terms of the overall production of yardage, of touchdowns, but he is drawing targets. 30.4% of the target volume, 8 targets a game. Again, I don't quite get why these numbers don't. How is that 8 and 22.5, 8 and 30.4? That's what happens when you draw from different sources. Just when we run into these quirks like that, we just kind of have to deal with it because these are coming from, I believe, no, that's from the same source. Those are both on that wide receiver advance board. They've both played 4 games. Some of these stat boards leave a lot to be desired. If this is there something I'm missing about how that stat works? Is that maybe they're drawing it down to, maybe that's a target per route run number? I don't know. I don't know why those don't align. Either way, we're not going to worry about it. It's coming from, like I said, it's coming from the same stat board. Some of these, sometimes you'll see 0 snaps, but Drew ran 14% routes. That's just because the board that I'm using for the snap percentage, Tegan Quatoriano, didn't qualify for that board, and who cares? But for a guy like Robert Woods, this should be accurate for these 2 guys, and it's not. I'm not exactly sure what it's doing. Apologies about that. Either way, all 3 of these guys run routes. All 3 of these guys draw targets. These I'm confident in. 8 targets a game for Nico. Tank Dell has stepped up into a primary role. Saw a 70% snap share last week. 65% on average is what he's up to. 76% of the snaps for Nico last week. He ran routes on 40% of those. Tank ran routes on more of his snap share. Overall, it probably amounts to the same number of total routes. Nico targeted on 43% of the routes that he ran last week, where Tank was only targeted on 13%. They can go back and forth a little bit, week by week, which one of them is going to have the better target shares, which one of them is going to be a little bit more relevant. Obviously, last week it was Nico's week. He put up 8 yards per route run versus the 0.7 yards per route run that Tank put up. 3.8 for Nico on the season, 2.4 for Tank. Both very, very relevant receivers. Both operate downfield. 12-yard A dot for Nico, 12.3 yard A dot for Tank. 2 targets in the red zone so far for Nico, 1 for Tank, 4 for Robert Woods, matches the target share in the red zone for Dalton Schultz. So basically, once they get inside the 20, we've got 4 primary targets and a very good running back to work with. They got a lot of options inside the red zone. Like the passing game. Oh, I'm sorry. I said a good running back. I was thinking of James Conner from Arizona because my brain is still on that game. I like the passing attack here. I do not like the running back here. That's what happens when I don't sleep. The brain lingers back on things we were talking about 10 minutes ago. So, just to reiterate, passing, yes. Running, no. They still do have a lot of good weapons to work with in the red zone in the passing attack. So, really, this one is, to put a button on it, Stroud, yes. Houston receiving core, yes. Houston running game, no. Atlanta passing game, not really. None of their quarterback, maybe is like just, some Kyle Pitts, some Drake London run back plays against some Houston stacks. and then just taking some shares of these guys in whatever they fall into. That's totally fine. Some Kyle Pitts value on DK, totally fine, but not a priority option by any means. Bijan, priority option on the ground. So definitely some stuff to draw from this game. KC in Minnesota. Fireworks expected here. I think it's all about the passing attack here. So cue the massive ground game for the Isaiah Pacheco versus Alexander Madison duel. Vegas is expecting a heavy shootout, 53-point total. Minnesota 3.5-point dogs at home. A not insignificant line, but a close enough line. Minnesota can definitely throw the ball with the best of them. Lot of opportunity to keep in the game with KC. KC hasn't been as crazy explosive this season so far, but they've still got Pat Mahomes. They've still got Travis Kelce. He's developing a connection with Rashee Rice. It's a work in progress. Not a lot of great receiving options. He's definitely run into some bumps with that receiving core now. But still, overall, I can side with Pat Mahomes. He's still drawing the bonus. He lost a couple of the yards. It's very, very close in the projection. Still drawing the bonus on the DK board. We'll see where it lands tomorrow. But the highest projected overall quarterback, I believe. Yeah, QB1 on DK. QB2 behind Hurts on FanDuel. 4 on both sites by point per dollar. Kirk Cousins, QB8 on both sites. Falls to 13th by point per dollar at 6,900 on the DK board. Still very playable, I think. Maintains 8th on the FanDuel slate point per dollar. The Chiefs, only 5.5 yards per pass attempt allowed so far this season. 5th overall, but giving up 22nd ranked 4.4 yards per rush attempt. Does that lead me to too many shares of the Madison Cam Akers dual-headed threat here? Probably not. Maybe to my detriment. It wouldn't totally stun me if Madison went out there and had a day. But I just don't like the way that Cam Akers is going to eat into that. Akers was just productive enough last week to make it, well, that didn't decide anything. Let's see the next round next week kind of a situation. He went... Akers, 7 touches, but he put up 51 yards on the 7 touches, which is not great for our purposes. Like I'm saying, I wish he had carried the ball 7 times and done nothing with it, or I wish he had gotten more volume, and neither one happened. So that's not great. The receiving core, a lot more straightforward on the Viking side of things. It's the Justin Jefferson show. When it's not, TJ Hawkinson's out there. Major target in the red zone, major weapon at the tight end position, projects out great. Both of these tight ends, obviously, near the top of the respective boards. Jordan Addison, a good option at the wide receiver position, still loses some snaps, some targets to KJ Osborne, who's still lingering here, still drawing a little bit of a projection. But I prefer Addison, and I think as the season continues, they're going to just start going more and more in his direction. So I like that option better, but I'll mix in some KJ Osborne for sure, especially at low ownership. Diving into things. 7 touchdowns allowed through the air so far for the Vikings, 233.5 yards per game, 6.3 yards per pass attempt with a 7.2 yard defensive ADOT. 26.5% pressure rate, 25.8% pressure rate for the Chiefs going up against Kirk Cousins. Neither team really racking up too many sacks despite a decent amount of pressure. Both quarterbacks throw the ball a ton. 35 attempts a game for Mahomes, 39 attempts a game for Kirk Cousins. Cousins still throwing for more than 300 yards a game. Had a bit of a clunker the last time out. Weeks 1 through 3, he threw for more than 344 yards each of those weeks. Last week, only 139 yards. KC, that pressure rate is top 5. Which, again, I don't really love ranking things in terms of top 5, top whatever, on short slates when there's ties and so on and so forth. But it's a significant enough pressure rate. But Kirk Cousins has seen pressure before. He's got plenty of weapons to work with. Get the ball out quick enough anyway. Not going to really worry about it. Cousins has thrown 11 touchdowns on the season. He's thrown 4 picks. Mahomes, 8 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. They can both work downfield as much as they want. 7.3 intended air yards per attempt from Mahomes. Only completing 3.8, but I put most of the blame for that on those receivers. 8.1 intended air yards per attempt for Cousins, completing 5 air yards per attempt. Mahomes runs a little bit, 5.8 rush attempts a game, 154 yards on the ground so far, 6.7 rush yards per attempt. Not really out there with a ton of designed runs or anything, though. More of a scrambles when he needs to, will run for the open situation to get a first down or what have you. But overall, more of a passer these days. But both of these guys, primo options. First and 8th, I'll have plenty. I think they've both got the skill players to support the play. On the ground, Pacheco projects out. Why did I have to say it that way? On the ground, Pacheco is drawing an interesting projection. 13th by DK, scoring 13th on FanDuel. 10th by value, 9th on FanDuel by value. Not a bad mark. Just going up against... what do they rank? Going up against a rush defense that's given up 3.5 yards per rush attempt. That's 6th. So that Minnesota rush D has been pretty stout. Their pass D, not as much. It's basically reverse situations. Good rush D, bad pass D for Kansas City. The opposite. Or for Minnesota, the opposite for Kansas City. I keep screwing up the easy stuff. As I'm clicking on it and looking at it, I'm saying it the wrong way around. So yeah, despite the 3.5 yards per rush attempt, it still amounted to 111 yards on the ground per game. Whereas Kansas City giving up 4.4 yards per rush attempt, but it only amounts to 104 yards a game, a little bit less. They've only given up a quarter of a touchdown per game. Amounts to a little bit less. Teams compelled to throw the ball a little bit against Kansas City. Madison drew 69% of the snaps last week. Akers is 29, but as I mentioned, Akers did put up a solid chunk of yards on his limited 7 touches. Madison overall last week, 17 carries for 95 yards. Still pretty good. 93 yards on 20 carries the week before. His little burst forward has kind of coincided, for whatever that's worth, with Akers arriving. Madison hadn't really done very much the first 2 weeks of the season. Jerick McKinnon will get a little bit involved. Not really overly interesting for fantasy purposes. 25th and 28th on DK. 27th, 28th on FanDuel. Just carrying the ball 1.5 times a game, but a little bit involved in the passing attack. Not even 2.25 targets a game. So hasn't even really been that involved in the passing attack. What's his routes? Routes run. It's last week. Ran only 10 routes on 20 snaps last week. For the season, running 12 routes on 24 snaps. And really not getting that overly targeted, so not a great option. It's really kind of become a Pacheco or bust situation on the ground for KC. He's all right. He's not my favorite option on the ground, but I do think there's a little bit of value there. He's obviously looked very good out there. He's scored twice. He's racking up 4.9 yards per rush attempt, getting the volume. 3.4 yards before contact per attempt, 1.5 yards after contact per attempt. A 48-yard long is a monster. He's drawing 3 targets a game, so he's been a little bit involved in the passing game. 2 targets in the red zone so far. So, yeah, it's really Pacheco and Madison. I don't like Cam Akers for fantasy here. My fear is that Cam Akers cuts into the Madison play a little bit. Not that I'm going to Madison all that much. I mean, neither guy ranks out well at all. They rank actually kind of similarly. Let's get into the more interesting part of this game. A little bit of chatter running on it in the chat here. Vic David Figueroa likes Jefferson but has other plans. Likes Addison over Jefferson to get that low-owned guy in there. I like that. Take out Hawkinson, play with Addison with Pacheco and Kelsey. That's giving Beantown suggestion for Beantown's Mahomes, Kelsey, Hawkinson, Rice lineup. I wouldn't have any issues with that lineup. I like Rice and his developing connection with the quarterback. I think you're somewhat unique in playing 2 tight ends. It's not bad. Even with 2 premium tight ends like this, people are a little bit reluctant to go to 2. Tight end 1, tight end 3 on DK. Same thing on FanDuel. 5th and 16th by point per dollar on DK. 2nd and 3rd by point per dollar on FanDuel. Best wideout in the game plays for Minnesota. The better of the 2 excellent tight ends plays for Kansas City. I think the second best wideout in the game also probably plays for Minnesota, Jordan Addison. Especially considering that the volume's a little bit difficult to figure out with these guys. Rashee Rice up to 13.3% of the volume overall on the season. Second behind Kelsey's 18.2%. Then it's Sky Moore at 10.5, and then everybody else below 10%. 2 targets a game for MVS, 3 targets a game for Tony, 3 targets a game for Watson. It's not pretty. In terms of the snaps, they go kind of everywhere. Targets per route run. If you see Noah Gray out there running a route, he's probably going to get targeted. 27% targets on the routes that he runs. Runs 44% routes, but he's only out there 49% of the snaps. Watson ticked up to a 61% snap share last week after averaging 44% for the season. Ran routes on 46% of those 61% snaps, but was only targeted on 5% of those routes. 0.2 yards per target. Or yards per route run, rather. 2 yards per route run for Travis Kelce. Drew 30% target share on the routes that he ran. Was out there for 79% of the snaps. Ran routes on 58% of those. He's already got 2 touchdowns on the year. 6.2 yard ADOT is only 7.7% of the air yard share, but that's also spread out everywhere according to that. 18.2 yard ADOT for MVS. He's still a downfield target, as is Justin Watson. Whether either of them even gets targeted is a question mark. Which one it's going to be down the field? Question mark. If Tony gets the target, does he catch it? Question mark. Technically, he's only got 3 drops on the season. But that's 3 drops on, 3 targets a game? So like 12 passes. Tony was out there for just 19% of the snaps on average, 24% last week. That's the thing with him. He's rarely out there. When he does get out there, he runs routes nearly 60% of the time that he's out there. Gets targeted 35% of the time that he runs a route. But the overall routes that he runs are limited. So the targets don't really amount to that much. And then he's just not that good when he's targeted. This guy down here, quite a bit better than Kadarius Toney. Last week, he was targeted on 43% of the routes that he ran. And he ran routes on basically half of all their plays. So essentially, hey, call it 40% of their overall plays last week were Justin Jefferson targets. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's pretty good. Volume is what we're looking for. 4 yards per route run last week. Also pretty good. Overall, 3.3 yards per route run. Getting targeted 12 times a game, 30% of their volume. Hawkinson getting another 8, getting 20%. So basically 50% of the passing game is made up of Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson. And then essentially the rest of it is KJ Osborne and Jordan Addison. It's pretty straightforward in Minnesota. Osborne, 91% of the snaps on average. Fell to 83% last week. Addison, 58% of the snaps last week, 64% on average. Addison ran routes on 54% of his 58% snap share last week. Osborne ran routes on 45%. So Osborne's running routes on fewer of the snaps that he's out there for, but he's out there for more snaps overall. If we want to, did I document this? Tell me I did. That would be handy if I did. I did not. I just made a note to remind myself of that situation. I got to get better with just what the actual text of these notes that I leave myself are. Instead of just taking a second to document the numbers, I literally wrote, still shares routes with KJ Osborne, who has not been overly productive. Could win out for the role this week. Like, use fewer words and just put the numbers, idiot. I make this harder than it has to be. So all that jabbering that I just did amounted to last week, Osborne was targeted a total of 2 times. The week before, he was targeted a total of 3 times. Addison, last week, was targeted just once, but he was targeted 8 times the week before that. He ran 42 routes that week, targeted on 8 of them. Last week, just 14 routes. That was the limited game by Cousins, of course. 139 pass yards after throwing for 344 at least in weeks 1 through 3. It was 344 and then 2 games in the 360s, I think, for Cousins. So just kind of a down week for them as a whole last week. I think they bounce right back. I think you see Addison probably bounce back, draw more targets or a similar amount of targets to KJ Osborne. Probably a lot more like week 3 for Jordan Addison. Week 3, again, was 8 targets on 42 routes. Targeted 19% of the time that he ran a route. 6.5 yards per target. 1.24 yards per route run. So, big time 1, big time 2, and then 3, 4 in either order. Doesn't really matter. I expect it goes Addison Osborne, but you could easily argue it the other way, and it may well wind up the other way. Gonna just have a lot of both sides of this one. You have to prefer the Vikings pass game just on talent. Not at the quarterback position, but in terms of the skill players on talent. Travis Kelce accepted. Rashee Rice, Sky Moore, MVS, Kadarius Toney, and Justin Watson do not really compare to Jefferson, Hockenson, Addison, and Osborne. You can take the tight ends out and say that the wideouts just, don't compare. Part of that is just because of how great Justin Jefferson is. But are we sure that Rashee Rice, Sky Moore, MVS are better even than Jordan Addison or KJ Osborne? I'm not. Interesting game. A lot of potential point scoring. Highest total on the board in Vegas by a pretty wide margin. What was it? 3.5 points? 4 points? 3 points. Nolan's in New England. Derek Carr, still questionable last I saw. Dealing with that shoulder that was just tragic for him last week. Did lead to Alvin Kamara drawing 14 targets and catching 13 of them last week in his return, which I think is kind of interesting. If you get similar looks, yeah, still questionable. If it results in just similar structure, similar play calling, that does make me, again, interested in Alvin Kamara, if nothing else, on that New Orleans side. Probably takes down my enthusiasm for Chris Olave, Michael Thomas, Rashid Shaheed, all of whom I like on a normal week, and Derek Carr is a quarterback that I like on a normal week. It's just with a shoulder injury, it's just like pitching. I don't like going to pitchers with shoulder injuries. I don't like going to quarterbacks with shoulder injuries. When your job is throwing the ball and you've got a shoulder, it's not a great combination. What else we got here? I really don't like the New England side of this game at all. Mac Jones, not going to do much. Ramondre apparently banged up. I didn't actually realize that, but he was confirmed that he's going to go. We got that note at the top of the show. He's my favorite piece of this offense, but he hasn't been great. Kind of burnt us the last time out. Other than him, I'm not going to Zeke. I wasn't on Zeke yesterday, even with the note from the coach, or last week, even with the note from the coaching staff about starters snaps. That just reeked of absolute bullshit going into last week, and it remained absolute bullshit through last week. I don't like the receivers on that team. Devontae Parker, Kendrick Bourne, Juju, Hunter Henry. As I've said before, it reads to me like a list of guys I didn't want to play when they were on other teams with better quarterbacks. Mac Jones had a good week 1 and hasn't been good since. Week 1, he was 316 yards and 3 touchdowns. Week 2, he fell to 231, one touchdown, 1 interception. Week 3, 201 yards, a touchdown, no interceptions. And then dropped last week to just 12 of 21 passing for 150 yards, 2 interceptions, no touchdowns. I don't think he's very good. Going up against a Saints pass defense that I do think is pretty good. 6th ranked 5.6 yards per pass attempt. 16th ranked 4.1 yards per rush attempt. So middle of the board in terms of against the run, but stout against the pass and have been for a couple of years. Carr's going to be going up against, and the rest of the New Orleans offense going up against the 8th and 9th ranked defense. 3.8 yards on the ground, 5.8 yards per pass attempt. New England's good defensively. I don't think that leads me to too many shares of the New England defense, just because too many good skill players on that New Orleans team doesn't really make them all that worth attacking. Even if it is a limited car, I probably don't need to go over the top for a New England defense. They're only 3,100 on DK, 44 on FanDuel. Where do they rank out? They do rank 3rd by FanDuel points, but 9th by points per dollar. 3rd on DK, but 7th by points per dollar. I rejiggered the defensive projections, by the way, as I said I was going to. So you can see Baltimore climbed a little bit. They're up to 4th by fantasy points, which I think is more correct now. 17th by value, 4th and 16th on DK. So even though they rank out pretty well, I don't love the idea of throwing that defense, even though it is a good defense, against just all these good skill players. I'm much more into the idea of grabbing the New Orleans defense and throwing it at this terrible New England team. That I like. They ranked top of the board. I have to imagine they're going to be explosively popular, especially at only 3,000 on DK. 1st by value, 1st by points on both sites. They're going to have to be popular here. As I said, Mac kind of has declined every week that he's played. Carr, presumably still limited by the shoulder. Not a great passing situation here. Going up against 2 good defenses. I would honestly forgive anybody that wanted to just kind of punt this game. Jones throwing the ball 36 times a game, completing just 64% of them, 224 yards a game, 5 touchdowns, but 4 interceptions. 8 intended air yards per attempt, but only completing 3.6 air yards per attempt. On the other side, Carr hampered by the shoulder, 8.6 intended air yards per attempt, 6.2 yards per attempt total, 4 air yards per attempt total. But 3 out of those 4 games, he wasn't playing with a hurt shoulder. Pressure-wise, Jones is going to be facing a significant amount of pressure. He's also facing a defense that's already got 5 interceptions on the season. I expect this number and this number to both tick up tomorrow. Gets me intrigued even more in that New Orleans defense. Ramondre, what was his last week? I know he disappointed me horribly last week. And I really don't want to have as much of him this week as I did. So what's the issue? It was a thigh, slated to play, limited in practice this week. Banged up thigh. He'll be out there. Last week he carried the ball 14 times for 30 yards. Week before, 19 times for 59 yards. 15 times for 50 yards, but scored a touchdown at least in week 2. Targeted 6 times in week 1, but fell to 3, 4, and 3 the last 3 weeks. A limited part of the passing game there. Not really doing that much on the ground. Over the course of the season so far for Ramondre, 2.7 yards per rush attempt, 1 touchdown, 1.7 yards before contact, 1.1 yards after contact. Not great. Last season he gave us whatever 1,040 yards divided by 210 rushing attempts was. A pretty good yardage per rush attempt, 5 touchdowns. Was also involved in the passing game pretty significantly last year. 69 receptions for 421 yards and a touchdown. 6.1 yards per reception. 2 games over 150 yards last year. Yeah, kind of a decline for Ramondre so far. Not that he can't bounce back, but not a great week to do it. Kamara, again, just played the 1 week so far. 75% of the snaps last week. 11 carries for 51 yards, 4.6 yards per rush attempt. And then just the monster. 14 targets, caught 13 passes. Didn't do a whole hell of a lot with it. Only 2.5 yards per catch. But just the idea that they were calling his number that many times, checking down to him, whatever you want to call it. RB7 on DK, RB9 by value, 8 across the board on FanDuel. Definitely going to be involved in some of the Kamara shares this week. Upside in the passing attack significantly and hyper talented on the ground. This is where it gets shaky. The New Orleans passing attack. Especially when we start talking about some of the downfield options. 13.6 yard ADOT for Chris Olave. Michael Thomas working in closer a little bit, 9.1 yard ADOT. But they're both going to be pulled in by Derek Carr's inability to get the ball out downfield. Olave's been targeted 10 times a game. Thomas 8 times a game. Rashid Shaheed 5 times a game. Shaheed drawing a 16.9 yard ADOT, the deepest target overall. 2 looks for him in the red zone. Michael Thomas was drawing most of the red zone targets at the beginning of the season. 5 so far overall. 3 targets so far for Olave. No starting tight end, Juwan. So we get the mixed bag of Taysom Hill and Jimmy Graham and Foster Moreau. Is Taysom Hill active? Is he not active? There he is. He's listed as a quarterback on this depth chart. That's why. Where do those looks go? I am not really sure. Taysom Hill projects out the best technically. Jimmy Graham, not great. Didn't qualify for the board last week. 20% of the snaps on average. Taysom Hill was out there for 51% of the snaps last week. 34% on average. Ran routes on 49% of the 51%. So basically ran routes on 25% of their plays last week. Was only targeted on 6% of those routes. So basically probably 1 target. Let's see what that looked like. Oh, what an annoying guy to look up. Passing, rushing, where's his receiving? Does it not have it? All right. Well, he's carried the ball 4 times last week for 10 yards, 4 times the week before that for 12. 9 times for 75 yards in week 2 against Carolina. He's thrown the ball twice this season, completed both of them. 1 for 8 yards, 1 for 13 yards. So, suffice to say, 0.4 yards per route run. 1 target a game. Not a primary weapon in the passing attack, but somebody who could be really annoying in terms of what this New Orleans team does this week. I'm probably not going to go to the tight end position on this New Orleans passing attack because I'm probably not going to go to this passing attack all that much anyway. But if I do, it's going to be just these guys. I probably don't even go Rashid Shaheed. just because of the downfield nature of his game. Doesn't project well at all with the limited car. And then New England, I really don't need any of these receivers. 31st by value, point per dollar for Devontae. 37th on FanDuel. Nobody ranks better than that. Hunter Henry lands kind of in the lower part of the tight end board. He's seen 2 targets in the red zone. Kendrick Bourne's seen 2 targets in the red zone, 1 apiece for Juju and Mike Gesicki. This is not a good passing offense. They're very cheap, but they're not even drawing good enough projections to support these cheap prices. If they were, they'd be drawing better point per dollar. Not even really great, like, hey, he's my last man in. He might get an opportunity. Not against this pass defense, not with that quarterback, not with these sorts of targets and routes and yardage numbers. Devontae targeted on 14% of the routes that he ran last week, 17% for Kendrick Bourne, 19% for Hunter Henry. Technically, Juju was targeted a decent amount last week, targeted on 38% of the routes that he ran. What did he end up doing? That amounted to 5 targets. He caught 1 of them for 14 yards. Go nuts. 5 targets on 15 routes run. Does that hold up? I just want to check. I'm trying to check this. 38%, 33%. Close enough. Different sources. So 0.93 yards per route run. What do these guys have? 1.1. Gotta love it. These things disagree with one another. Slightly different ways that these things come together. Some of it's observational on what a guy did on a certain play. But it's not ideal that these numbers don't agree with one another from site to site all the time, just for analysis purposes. Either way, whichever one of those sites is right, it's not a very good yard per route run number, and you probably just don't want to go to this New England passing attack. Limited options in this game. Like the defense. Some Alvin Kamara. Very minimal. Anybody else? Some New Orleans defense. Maybe some Ramondre. Maybe some New England defense, but that's about it. I don't really like this game for skill players all that much. This game for skill players, at least on one side, I think we can definitely get into. As discussed, 1.5 point swing in the line in Miami's favor. They went from 11.5 point favorites to 13 point favorites. 48 point total stayed the same. Saquon still a question mark. They're calling him a true game time decision. If he goes, he's somewhat playable. Miami is allowing 4.3 yards per rush attempt, 19th. They're also allowing 7.3 yards per pass attempt, which ranks 28th. Unfortunately, the Giants have Daniel Jones at quarterback, and nobody really weapon-wise in the passing game to exploit that, outside of maybe Saquon. Maybe Darren Waller. You get super cheap Wan'Dale Robinson. $3,000 on the DK slate is definitely keeping him very relevant. He projects out pretty well. Darius Slayton doesn't project out that great. He's also cheap. Paris Campbell sees a little bit of volume, sees some snaps, runs some routes. Jalen Hyatt, a lot less so. Hodgins, less than that. It gets really ugly really fast in this Giants passing game. Matt Breida gets the touches if Saquon doesn't go. He's wildly unplayable whether he's getting the touches or not. I guess he's like minorly playable, but 52-63. Even if he's getting Saquon's touches, really not for that money. Lot of options on this side. Either one of these guys could have a day. Devin Achane kind of grabbed the reins the last 2 weeks. Last time out, Achane. Only 11 carries, 60% of the snaps, 120 yards. 45 yards on 43% of the snaps for Raheem Mostert last week. So Mostert lost, a little bit of the snap share overall, but still 2 very capable running backs. I don't love that Mostert cost $8,000 on the FanDuel slate as he's losing snaps to the other guy who costs $7,500. They're much more competitively priced with one another on the DK board. Either one of them against this defense or both of them against this defense could easily get there. It could turn into a second half where they're just running the ball on the ground and their idea is that they're going to run out the clock and these guys just accidentally break big plays against this shitty Giants defense. Basically anything is on the board for this Miami team. Tua projects out as a monster on both sites. Tyreek, Waddle, two premium options at the wide receiver position. Less so when we get to the third wideout with Braxton Berrios, Durham Smythe on there. Somebody asked at the beginning of the show if Chase Claypool was playing. Not that I've seen. Chase Claypool traded to this Dolphins team just because, they were lacking for weapons. I actually don't know. I don't know if he's eligible. Because Chicago played on Thursday and he was technically a healthy roster scratch for that game. So I don't know if that renders him ineligible to play on Sunday for a different team. Not sure how that works actually in the NFL. I wouldn't expect much even if he suits up. I can't imagine he's going to be out there. I'd be surprised if we saw him this week. In future games, I think he becomes a much more interesting option than Braxton Berrios, given his talent. I could see him sliding into this third banana role in that offense pretty nicely. That said, I also kind of thought that he was going to do something with the Bears, and they didn't like him so much that they asked him to stop showing up for work. I've had that happen before. It's fun. Just go work from home. I really don't like going to this Giants offense, but I think we're going to have to. The fortunate part about it was with that point swing, Danny Dimes lost a significant portion of the projection that was carrying him to a pretty high ranking. So we won't have to get to as much of that side, and we can just kind of go to our Dolphins here and then get a couple of these guys as run back plays, primarily Saquon, Darren Waller, and then probably a little bit of Wan'Dale for sure because he's very, very cheap on the DK slate. Less so on FanDuel. Two is expensive but worthwhile. 7,100, second on the board on DK, first by value. Third on the board, second by value on FanDuel at 8,000. Danny Dimes, a little bit less so. Significant drop from yesterday where he was ranked, fourth, fifth, somewhere around there. So that 3-point swing was huge, and I'm very happy about it. Now watch him come out and put up a monster. .191 yards a game. He's thrown 2 touchdown passes to the 6 interceptions that he's thrown. Throwing the ball 32 times a game, but only completing 22.5% of his passes. Looking for 6.3 air yards per attempt, but only coming up with 3.6. Two on the other side, looking for 8.1, coming up with 5.7. 9.6 yards per pass attempt total. 5.8 yards per pass attempt for Danny Dimes. Two has thrown 9 touchdowns. He's averaging 326.5 yards per game. Throwing the ball 34 times, completing 71% of them. Throwing the ball downfield, working in the red zone. Doesn't really run the ball all that much. 2.8 rush attempts per game. Danny Dimes on the other side, 8.5 rush attempts per game, 173 yards so far. 5.1 rush yards per attempt. It's the one thing he does fairly well out there. 1 rushing touchdown so far. But if they're just going to be geared up against him running the ball, not worried about their receivers all that much, I don't know. Just not a believer, not a supporter, not a fan. Miami is 19th against the run, 4.3 yards per rush attempt, and 28th against the pass. There's going to be opportunity for him to throw the ball. I'll give him that. I just don't think he delivers for us. Miami only gaining pressure 20.8% of the time, despite blitzing essentially half the time. Only 4 sacks so far. Just a much better option on the other side. Better skill players to work with. So again, A-Chain, number 1 by value on the DK board now, 6,100. 4th by raw projections, 4th and 2nd on the FanDuel slate. Going up against the Giants D, allowing 4.4 yards per rush attempt, 133 yards a game, 1.75 touchdowns. Both these teams giving up touchdowns on the ground and a fair amount of yardage. 4 touchdowns so far for A-Chain, 6 for Mostert. The snaps, as we said, 60-40 last week. Starting to favor A-Chain, but Mostert's still involved, still out there. Targets, they're both getting 3 and change targets a game, turning him into a little bit of production. Just a ridiculous number before contact for A-Chain, 7.3 yards before contact per attempt. 4.1 is very good for Mostert as well. A-Chain's also 4.2 yards after contact. 7 carries of 10-plus yards. He's got 2 50-yard carries already, 67-yard long. Absolute monster. He's been targeted 4 times in the red zone. He's got 2 touchdowns through the air already. Hyper involved. Saquon, he's played twice. 14.5 carries a game. Involved in the passing game significantly. 5.5 targets. Basically amounts to like 20 touches a game. The focal point of everything they do on offense when he's out there. It's just a matter of whether he's healthy. I don't think they run him out there if he's not basically fully healthy. So I don't really worry about that. If he's out there, I think you can go to him. But, you know, it's more the limitation of their offense overall than it's like his limitation. (1-1A) for Miami. Pretty damn good 1-1A. Tyreek, Jalen Waddle. Not bad. Tyreek drawing 10 targets a game. Waddle 5 targets a game. 4.2 yards per route run for Tyreek. 2.6 yards per route run for Waddle. Last week they were both targeted 19% of the time on the routes that they ran. They didn't come up with a big one in that one that we were expecting to be a shootout with Buffalo last week. Tua only ended up 25 of 35 for 282 yards and a touchdown, 1 interception. They lost 48-20, so they didn't really hold up their end of the bargain. But overall, Tua second in yards per attempt. He's got the most passing touchdowns in the league, going up against the team that's 13th by yards per pass attempt. Is that right? Or does that disagree as well? 21st by yards per pass attempt on this board. Whatever. At the tight end position, Durham Smythe should be back out there. 17th on the FanDuel board, 16th on the DK board. Bounced back to 85% of the snaps last week after, what was it, 2 weeks ago? He had that weird game where he was limited for snaps. That other guy, Hill, I want to say? No, not Hill. That's Tyreek's name. What the hell's the third string tight end? Now I'm bouncing all over the place. Depth chart. There it is. Oh, it is Hill. Julian Hill. I was right. So yeah, I think we just get back to Durham Smythe again. Week before last, he only saw 26 snaps, 12 of them on special teams. Only ran 6 routes. That was after 40 routes the week in week 1, 28 routes in week 2. But he bounced back to 24 routes in week 4 last week. Was targeted on 16.7% of those. Amounted to 4 targets. Caught all 4 of them for 41 yards. So a semi-viable tight end option against the team that is lousy against tight ends. For 3,000, he's a mix-in. Only ranks in the teens. Not much of a projection. It's really these two guys and the running backs. Make a bunch of different combinations of those players. Braxton Berrios, 49% of the snaps last week. He did run routes on 66% of those 49%. Was targeted 32% of the routes that he ran. What does that amount to overall? That amounts to 6 targets. Caught all 6 of them, 43 and a touchdown. If it gives you that kind of involvement, that kind of a game, he's definitely interesting. A speedy, skillful kind of a guy with the ball in his hands. You've also got Ced Wilson, Robbie Chosen there. Could draw minor amounts of targets. 35% of the snaps for Wilson, 28% of the snaps for Chosen last week. They ran routes when they were on the field. They were targeted a little bit. 20% target share for Wilson when he was running a route. 11% for Chosen. Couple of looks in their direction, maybe. Got to get it. Those guys become touchdown dependent at the bottom of the board. On the Giants side of things, it's really ugly in the passing game. 6 targets a game for Waller. 6 targets a game for Wandale in his 2 games that he's played. I like the Wandale option at price. He's going to rank out pretty well. First by point per dollar value on the DK board. I guess we can get interested in that for 3,000. Only 28th by DK points, 25th by FanDuel points, 21st by value. Not showing nearly as much on the FanDuel slate because he costs 5,400. Darius Slayton at 41 on the DK board, a little bit more playable. 56th ranked by point per dollar though. At 59 on the FanDuel board, actually he ranks a little bit better on FanDuel. I misspoke. 53rd by point per dollar on the FanDuel board. That's their second best wide receiver. Paris Campbell, 47th and 54th by value. Hyatt, 59th and 58th by value. Hyatt last week played 60% of the snaps. Ran a route on 64% of those. He was targeted on 7% of the routes that he ran. They're just not looking in Hyatt's direction at all. Jones, limited time on his feet in the pocket. Incapable of throwing the ball on the run down the field. You'll see these runs where he breaks pocket. He's got a guy lined up, waiting to throw, and either runs out of bounds or gets tackled for a loss. Just doesn't get the ball out effectively to downfield receivers when he's got to scramble and doesn't have enough time in the pocket to let a downfield route really develop. So it's hampered anything that we expected from Jalen Hyatt. 0.4 yards per route run last week, 1.4 yards per route run overall, 2 targets a game, 3.9% of the limited Giants passing game. Paris Campbell doesn't work really downfield. 4-yard ADOT. Draws targets. He's targeted 5 times a game. 0.7 yards per route run. 1.6 yards per route run for Wandale. 1.2 yards per route run for Darren Waller, who was supposed to come in here and revolutionize the tight end position for this team. He's drawing an 8.5 yard ADOT, putting up 40 yards a game on 18% of their targets, 6 a game. Last week, 0.5 yards per route run. He was targeted on 19% of the targeted only 8% of the routes that he ran last week. So now they're not even throwing to him. It's just such a crappy team. Outside of Wandale and his extreme value marking, I really don't like this Giants offense all that much. They're going to have to score to hang with Miami. I do think you could play a little bit of Waller run back against Miami. I do think you could play some Wandale run back against Miami. Maybe some Slayton. Slayton was their most involved receiver. He sees most of the snaps, 88% of the snaps last week, 80% on the season. Ran routes 63% of the time when he was out there last week, 67% of the time on average. But also him, 7% target share on the routes that he ran last week. On average, just 15% of the target share on the routes that he ran. 1 yard per route run. 5 targets a game. They're just bad. Don't get overinvested in Giants. 4 red zone targets for Paris Campbell. 2 red zone targets for Darren Waller. Daniel Jones throws the ball to the other team significant amount of the time in the red zone. There's that problem. I think you can get some Miami D. They were second, but not great point per dollar. Probably going to be popular going up against the Giants. But I think you could probably also game it with Miami's defense. Is Braxton Berrios still returning punts and kicks for them? Berrios, 9 snaps on special teams last week, 28 overall. Joker, shut up, pal. We're looking at Braxton Berrios. Joker, this is important, goddammit. 91 kick yard returns last week. 30 punt yard returns the week before. 27 punt yard returns the week before. The idea of like a sneaky Braxton Berrios Miami defense pairing isn't the craziest thing in the world. Giants could certainly get gouged on a big return. Got to take it back to the house, make it matter, but it's possible. So, big yes, big yes. Moderate yes, moderate yes. Meh, but tons of value. Meh. Ugh. I think everybody can translate those noises, right? Significantly valuable, very interesting, big question mark to play. Significantly valuable, barely interesting. Don't like my Giants. I have a ton of Miami. Figure out unique ways to get to them. Whether that's the Mostert A-Chain combo again, putting both of them in the lineup. Whether it's a Berrios and the D kind of a thing. Tua, Berrios, their defense and A-Chain. Is that piling too much in there? You got to get that weird Berrios return for a TD. And speaking of New York, the other awful New York football team. Zach Wilson gained a little bit overnight. I forget which direction. I mean, this moved slightly, I think. Gained a little bit there. Brees drawing a very strong projection. Garrett Wilson can't help but be strongly projected just because he's so damn good. Alan Lazard, a little bit of meat on the bone there. It's mostly coming from the Denver side. Denver giving up 5.6 yards per rush attempt, 31st ranked, 8.9 yards per pass attempt, 32nd ranked, dead worst in football. A generationally bad defense over the first 4 weeks of the season. I don't know that they're going to be that bad all year. This could be a good get-right spot for the Denver D. Not that it's necessarily going to be. But somebody, I forget who it was, somebody asked in the comments from yesterday's show why Zach Wilson was so low projected after having a good game against Kansas City. And my response would just be because the model knows that Zach Wilson is an atrocious quarterback, regardless of the one good game that he had against Kansas City. And that good game, while it was good for Zach Wilson and what our expectations of Zach Wilson are, it really only amounted to 28 of 39 for 245 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's good for Zach Wilson. That's not good for even Russ Wilson on the other side, let's say, or basically any other quarterback. I remain very, very dramatically unconvinced about Zach Wilson's ability. I love his 2 weapons here. I'll probably have shares of both of these guys. I don't know that they'll come in stacks of Zach Wilson. Maybe a couple, just because Denver's so bad. But yeah, I'm going to need to see it several more times before I get any faith whatsoever in Zach Wilson. And let's not forget that he also coughed it up and ruined the game at the end. So I don't know how much of a confidence builder even that was. Russ on the other side, strong option. Going up against the Jets, their defense is okay. Middle of the board on both sides of the ball. 4.2 yards per rush attempt, 6.3 yards per pass attempt, 17th and 15th. They're getting a little bit strained. I think they're better than those numbers are probably. Just a little bit strained by their offense being largely inept for much of the season. Out there a little bit too much. But it's a good defense. But I like Russ. I think he's a capable quarterback. Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy is a good wide receiver pairing. I don't love the situation on the ground. There's some buzz that maybe the Javonte might get out there stuff is a little bit of coach speak to try and throw people off. To me, a guy who practiced in full on Friday, I don't see why, unless that's exactly what they're doing, trying to just, throw the Jets off their game. I feel like Javonte's going to play, or at least, maybe some snaps. I think it cuts into the upside for Jaleel McLaughlin. Fortunately, it's just news-based. If you get Javonte out, you can put some Jaleel McLaughlin in, and you can definitely play some Samaje Perine, too. 4,800, 5,400. Samaje's 200 cheaper than McLaughlin. In the second half last week, Samaje got 60% of the snaps. McLaughlin outplayed him. McLaughlin got 32% of the snaps in the second half. He put up 104 yards on 10 touches, Samaje didn't really do much, but Samaje outsnapped him. Especially if I can get him cheaper on DK. Not uninteresting. Cheaper on FanDuel too, 57 to 54. But I just think Javonte might end up playing and just might completely burn that McLaughlin spot. And McLaughlin's also a tiny guy. I know there's talent, there's gadget players, there's speed is the primary weapon at that point, and your size doesn't really matter. But at a certain point, like when you're 5'7", I think he's 5'7". What's his backing up screens here? Jaleel is 5 foot nothing, 100 and nothing. You gonna tell me it doesn't have it on this profile? So annoying. Well, I'm not skipping around sites. I'm pretty sure he's 5'7", tiny guy. .57", 187 pounds. Not your biggest guy in the world. But the primary factor there is Javonte might play. Also not going up against a pushover rush defense. So the Jets, the much better matchup, but the much worse team. Denver, mid-board matchup. Overall, kind of a mid-board offense. If they get Marvin Mims involved ever, that'll be an uptick for them. Only 2 to go after this one. Did not make great time, but will probably improve on last week's time, I think. Which is good. So let's do it this way. Cortland Sutton, 21-28 on DK, 21-32 on FanDuel. Judy, 24-50, 23-29. Maybe my enthusiasm about these Denver Broncos receivers should be a little bit more in check, given those numbers. Hadn't looked at those yet. Overall, Sutton, 83% of the snaps last week. Judy, just 62%, still working his way back. Overall, overall 69% of the snaps for Jerry Jeudy. Sutton out there for 89% of the snaps. Judy's running routes on 77% of the snaps that he does see, though. He's getting targeted 22% of the time, 19% on average. Last week, 2.3 yards per route run, 1.8 yards on average. Mims, still one of the yards per route run leaders, 4.3 yards per route run on the season. 4.3 last week, 6.5 on the season. But he's only targeted 3 times a game. He only gets 35% of the snaps last week, 27% on average. When he's out there, he runs a route 65% of the time, targeted on 18% of that 65%, but that does not amount to very much. One big downfield play, 60-yard long. He's got a receiving touchdown on the year. Need to get him more involved. So far, they're kind of refusing to. For Sutton, 7 targets a game, 23% of the volume. 5 catches a game, a 9.4 yard ADOT. Judy significantly outdrawing him in terms of depth of target. Mims, obviously, also is. Sneakily, so is Brandon Johnson at 11.3. He's drawing 3 targets a game, 35% of the snaps last week. Ran routes 71% of the time, but only targeted 8% of those 71% of the routes. These just kind of fell off a little bit. He was getting a little bit more targeted earlier. Down the board, Troutman for 2,700 doesn't project well at all. Doesn't show much value, even points per dollar. It's an exploitable spot. He will be the guy who's going to get those targets. He was out there 88% of the snaps last week, ran routes on half those snaps, but was only targeted 5% of the time when he ran a route. 0 yards per route run last week. 0.3 yards per route run on the season. 0 touchdowns. Targeted in the red zone 4 times. Jets not great against the tight end position. On the Jets side of the ball, Garrett Wilson, the primo receiver. Can't help him but rank 8th on both sites by raw projections, 10th on the DK board by point per dollar, 8th on the FanDuel point per dollar board. If Zach Wilson throws 2 touchdowns tomorrow, odds are they're both going to Garrett Wilson. Allen Lazard would be the next most likely guy. He does land 12th on the DK board by point per dollar. He only costs $3,900. That's not uninteresting for a wide receiver who does draw a little bit of target volume. 4 targets a game, 14.5%. Out there for 86% of the snaps last week, 89% on average. Runs routes on 60-ish% of those, 64% last week. Only targeted 9% of the time when he ran a route last week, but 14% on average. What do the week by week targets look like here? No, not there. Week by week for Lazard, targets went 4, 4, 5, and 3. 61-yard high with a touchdown last week was his high water mark. 2 catches each of the first 2 weeks for 46 and 23 yards. 3 catches in week 3 for 39 yards. Not overly involved. 30 routes in week 2, 35 in week 3, 32 in week 4. He's the next man up. He's the number 2 wideout in that offense. Tyler Conklin at the tight end position, minimally interesting. Ranks 12th, 14th by value on both sites. 68% of the snaps last week, 77% on average. About half the time he runs a route. He was targeted 30% of the routes he ran last week, 20% on average, 5 times a game. Hasn't gotten in the end zone yet, but has 1 red zone target. If he develops any kind of a connection, young quarterback, tight end is usually a thing. He's looking his way. Hasn't turned into a lot of production yet, though. Nobody really downboard Cobb, Azoma, Mikol. No thanks. So, it's yes to some Russ Wilson with some Sutton and Judy and, mix and match my way through that. Really, it's kind of a no on the ground for Denver for me. I do think you can go to the Denver defense. And then very, very limited shares of Zach Wilson stacks. But I do like Breece Hall. I do like Garrett Wilson. And Allen Lazard probably is worth a couple value darts. Does that add up to going to Zach Wilson stacks? Not necessarily. Like I was saying at the top of the show, just because these guys project well doesn't have necessarily a rising tide effect on him. It's the other way around. He's got to play well for these guys to really deliver on where they're projected. So you're betting on a bad quarterback when you go to Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, Allen Lazard. More so with Wilson and Lazard. Hall can obviously get there on his own. Breece Hall, probably my favorite overall part of this game. Another good one to go to. The other 50-point total on the board, second highest on the day. Rams 4-point dogs in Los Angeles. Jalen Hurts, top of the board on the FanDuel, second on the FanDuel slate, I think. No, QB1 on FanDuel. That's right. He and Mahomes were flip-flopped. QB1 on FanDuel, QB3 on DK. Not achieving the passing bonus, but still projects out great on the DK board. Mahomes was drawing the passing bonus by a couple of yards. Stafford, a very, very playable quarterback here. 5th on DK by points, 3rd by value. Same on FanDuel. I like both sides of this one for passing. Hurts going up against a Rams defense that ranks 10th with 5.9 yards per pass attempt. 16th ranked, 6.4 yards per pass attempt for Philly. They've been much better against the run, which could have a little bit of an impact on Kyren Williams. He still projects out great. He's getting a ton of volume, but he's not that good, I don't think. It's just more volume-based, leading to some decent numbers. Against a good rush defense, I don't know that volume equals numbers necessarily. We've got the total wild card of Cooper Kupp coming back, and what does that look like? Almost definitely going to be out there, but reports that he's going to be on a snap count, reports that we've got Who knows what the mix looks like between him and Puka, who's been one of the most targeted receivers in the entire NFL so far this season. What does the downstream impact look like for Tutu, Higbee, Van Jefferson even? Gets concerning. Can't help but have both of these guys projected high. I hope we get some kind of reporting on a limitation for Puka. They've both come down a little bit since last night. I hope that we can carve into these guys a little bit more. Obviously drawing more projection on the DK board in the PPR scheme. A little bit more reasonable on the FanDuel slate for both of those guys to succeed at that level. Whoever's getting the targets, I want to definitely have in my lineup. I like all three of the primary wideouts there. I don't dislike the tight end, and I don't think that Van Jefferson's off the board, even with Cooper Kupp coming back, as a A-dot monster dart throw. Just needs to actually catch the ball. Jalen Hurts has a dominant 1-1A in A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. He's also got an excellent running back to work with in DeAndre Swift. I don't know why I said DeAndre Swift, because of Devonta Smith and DeAndre Swift next to one another is definitely what screwed up the enunciation there. But I put the emphasis on the wrong syllable. 24th ranked 4.4 yards per rush attempt for Los Angeles. Definitely bodes well for DeAndre. He projects out really well. I like that spot, but I also really like the passing game for Philly here. Quez Watkins most likely coming back, cuts into OZ's upside. They both just project out kind of as mixers. Neither one of them is a high priority by any means. Kenny Gainwell kind of falls by the wayside, with Swift picking up most of the carries. Dallas Goedert, not really prominent for fantasy scoring yet this season, but we've got a pretty decent track record with Dallas Goedert. I think we can give him a little bit of a leash, and I think he's got an opportunity to perform this week. On the quarterback side, again, just jumping back to this board real quick because we do have to talk about Jalen Hurts' 3 rushing touchdowns so far. 10 carries a game, 134 yards. They love to pick him up and throw him into the end zone. The brotherly shove, as they renamed it last week. I was saying that around a little bit. All of a sudden, it went from the first 3 weeks of the season, every single broadcast I saw use the phrase tush push, to every single broadcast last week. Cannot possibly be a coincidence. Changed it to brotherly shove. Somebody somewhere sent an email or a memo or something from that league office saying, hey, we can't have these guys out there talking about tush pushes. Call it the brotherly shove. I want to see how long that marketing meeting took. I also want to get a copy of that email. Either way, Jalen Hurts, he's an absolute monster. He can throw the ball into the end zone, carry the ball into the end zone. 32 passes a game, 239 yards, thrown 5 TDs already. 41 passes a game for Stafford, 307 yards a game, 3 touchdowns, already thrown 5 picks. He's Matthew Stafford. That'll happen. 8.3 intended air yards per attempt, 9.9 intended air yards. Hurts just slinging the ball downfield. Both coming up with 4.8 completed, 7.4 yards per attempt. I like both sides of the ball on this one. Through the air, I'm going to have tons of these receivers. I'm going to have a lot of these receivers also just letting them mix into lineups where these teams aren't stacked. I'll probably have lineups where it's either Puka or Kupp against either AJ or Devonta, and it's not a stack with the Philly or the Los Angeles quarterback, just like 2 wide receivers against each other from this game in some other lineup. It's like I call it a Mahomes, Kelsey, Rashee Rice. 2 receivers from this game going neck and neck. I like getting combinations like that, especially in a dynamic game with this many good, viable skill player options. Somebody's going to go under-owned. Somebody's going to get a sneaky amount of targets. So I just want to spread out across a lot of these options. Before we get to that, though, on the ground, DeAndre 5th and 4th on DK, 5th and 7th on FanDuel. Going up against the defense, allowing 4.4 yards per rush attempt, 111 per game. He's gaining 6.2 yards per rush attempt. He scored twice already, carrying the ball basically 15 times a game, targeted another 3 times a game. Put the ball in his hands and let him get to work. 63% of the snaps last week. Gainwell down to 38% of the snaps last week. He's still... 42% of the snaps, 10 plus touches on, I don't know what the time frame is on that. I think that's the last 2 weeks. Gainwell carried the ball 4 times last week. 14 for 43 was the week before. Carried the ball 4 times last week, was targeted 2 times, caught both of them, but a lot more limited. 36 snaps in week 3 versus 25 last week. 38 snaps in week 1 was probably going to be as high. 14 carries for 54 yards that week. 4 catches, 4 targets. Vic David says, Mahomes got the hookup. Holler if you hear me. Bill Byers saying Rashee Rice for sure, but if you want to play a jet, Vic says Rice is the best for 3,600. Screw Lazard. What can go wrong? Oh, yeah, Zach Wilson. Yeah, exactly. Trey's enthused about the Zach Wilson play. I get worried when Trey gets enthusiastic about stuff I don't really like. Trey's a sharp guy. Trey likes the Jets' defense. Interesting. It is a good defense. Like I said, I do think that they're, those numbers, the yards per attempt, are kind of skewed by the fact that they're just out there so much. So they're probably underperforming their talent a little bit in terms of the yards per attempt. Talented defense. I appreciate you right back, Trey. You're here all the time, buddy. That alone makes you a sharp guy in my estimation. Speaking of which, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. A couple dozen people hanging out. Always good. People catch up to this show overnight. Need to pop it on the replay. Listen to it at 2x speed in the morning. I get it. What's up, Larry C? I'm sure you're out there somewhere. You might be hearing me in the future. What's your weird future world like? The future of tomorrow morning, Larry C. Boston Scott, pretty irrelevant at this point. On the other side, Royce Freeman, Ronnie Rivers, pretty irrelevant behind Kyren Williams. Kyren, 72% of the snaps last week. Ronnie Rivers did draw 28% of the snaps. Carrying the ball 2.25 times a game. Putting up 5.2 yards per rush attempt. That's pretty good, but no volume to speak of. Kyren is the volume monster. 16 rushing attempts per game. 3.8 yards per rush attempt. Seeing another 5.5 targets. So basically they're putting the ball in his hands 20, 21 times a game. It's the kind of volume that leads to scoring. He's got 5 touchdowns already. Leads to fantasy scoring. Just going up against a really stout rush defense. Where in a game where I think they're going to need to throw the ball to stay in the game. In a game where I think they're going to be scheming to throw the ball. I just think it has a limiting impact on Kyren Williams here. He projects out fine. 9th by points, 14th by value on DK, 7th and 12th on FanDuel. Projects out fine, but a lot of situational stuff that I don't love about the Kyren Williams spot. As I said before, kind of unclear what Kupp's role is going to be. Right now, giving him full reign, I've got him 6th by raw points, 35th by value because he's super expensive, 5th and 15th on FanDuel. Puka, 5th and 19th on DK, 6th and 10th on FanDuel because he's also still got full run here. Tutu, I did give a little bit of a haircut in what his targets would look like. Still lands 23rd, 33rd on DK, 28th on both categories on FanDuel. Even with Kupp coming back, I think Tutu's going to get a few looks. Solid 11.1 yard ADOT. He's got a touchdown already on the season. He's been drawing 9 targets a game. So, shave that down to 4, 5. He could still do something with it. It's just not going to be as many opportunities. But he is still the same, dynamic, interesting, exciting receiver that they've been throwing the ball to a decent amount. Twice in the red zone. So if it takes everybody away from the Tutu play, I can definitely get some Tutu Atwell into my lineups at 5,300 on DK, 5,800 on FanDuel. He's not going to project out great because of the limited situation, but definitely some big play potential there. I mentioned Van Jefferson before. He's still drawing an okay-ish projection. Probably going to come down a little bit more as I shave more targets off of him. But for 3,800 as a home run play, and I say home run play meaning like not, this is a home run of a play. They can hit a home run with him on a 17.6 yard ADOT. He was drawing 4 targets a game before Cup comes back. I expect that just drops to like 2 downfield deep targets here. But it could be the day that connects. And on the day that connects, that could be a slate bending kind of a result. Not slate breaking necessarily. He's not at the dead minimum. But slate bending for sure. God forbid you get the day where he catches 2 of those and gets them both in the end zone. Now you're breaking the slate. But let's be realistic about things. I think you're getting, at most, 3 downfield looks for Van Jefferson. It's not ideal. But especially if Cooper Kupp is limited to, he's going to run 15 routes today, we've got to use him sparingly, leads to more looks for these guys. Bill Byers says Laporta looks interesting. I agree wholeheartedly with that. I like that spot significantly. Vic says nobody's going to pay 51 when Kelsey is 76 and is in better matchup, but Brown out. Laporta for mayor this week. I like that. I think you could probably pretty easily get Laporta elected mayor up there right now. Just what he's done at that position vote so far for them. So all over the passing game in this one. On the other side, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, premium options, 4th and 3rd for A.J., not far behind, 7th and 9th on FanDuel for Devonta. 4th and 7th by raw points on DK. They slip a little bit because they're both expensive, so 20th and 29th by point per dollar, but still excellent options. They see all the snaps, 96 and 99% last week, 91 and 99% on average. They run routes like crazy, 61%, 59% routes run, basically every drop back. If this was per drop back, these would be significantly higher. They're running routes every drop back. Last week, AJ was targeted on 33% of the routes that he ran. Devontae was targeted 23% of the time. On average, that's 32 and 20, so about right. It amounts to 11 targets and a 35% share for AJ, 7 targets and a 24% share for Smith. A 13.3 yard ADOT for Smith, a 13 yard ADOT for AJ. This is why it leads to Jalen Hurts just throwing the ball downfield at a significant clip, because these guys operate downfield. 4 targets already in the red zone for A.J. Brown, 1 for Smith. Ben Skoranic's not on their team. He's on the other side. 3 so far for Dallas Goedert. Goddard's getting 5 targets a game. He's out there running routes about half the time. He plays 100% of the snaps. He runs routes on 48% of them. Only 0.7 yards so far per route run. 5 targets a game. 15.7% of the share, only giving us 3.25 receptions a game. No touchdowns yet. A 6.5 yard ADOT. But when they start working their way into the red zone, it starts feeling like Dallas Goedert time. I have a feeling that by the end of the season, his red zone targets will be significant. His touchdown number will course correct into the, let's call it 5 to 8 range for the season. And we'll be fairly happy with at least 2 weekends out of Dallas Goedert for DFS purposes. Goff is low owned. Reynolds only pulling 10% right now, so combined with Laporta's 20, that's not too bad. Yeah, once you get those guys in combination, that's definitely not uninteresting. So big yes to A.J. Brown, big yes to Devonta Smith, a fairly solid yes to Dallas Goedert, and then you get into the Quez Watkins and Zacchaeus situation. Zacchaeus last week, 86% of the snaps. Both his games were with Quez out. Quez was drawing 79% of the snaps when he was in, running routes on 59%, but only drawing targets on 6% of those. OZ was drawing targets on 7% of the routes that he ran. He ran routes on 48% of the 70% snaps that he saw while filling in that role. Does it completely change up with the return of Quez? Do they try and get a look or two to both of these guys? Maybe, probably. I know I'm bouncing back and forth on the screen. Apologies for that. A 15.6 yard ADOT so far for OZ. That's significant. 1 look in the red zone. That was, I think that was his touchdown. Overall, neither one of these guys rates out well. 71st and 72nd on DK, 69th and 72nd on FanDuel. Unless something changes dramatically with their projections between now and tomorrow morning, I don't think you really have to worry about it too much. Trey asks, how much do you think Higbee blocks with Cup back? More? Let's see. Where can I go to figure that? if I go over here and I go to Tyler Higbee and I look at last year, I think that'll be a decent barometer. Tyler Higbee. It's the easiest way to figure this out. So this year, it's annoying because this isn't in percentages. This operates on a raw numbers. 28 routes, 50 routes, 38 routes for Higbee on 71, 73, and 73 snaps. Those are raw numbers. Let me open up 2022. It's not going to let me open it in a different tab. Of course not. 21, 18, 22. Short answer, too late. Yes, probably will block a little bit more, run a few fewer routes. Looks like he averaged about, call it high teens, low 20s routes run. Had some very low totals in there last year. Looking week by week, like 11 routes, a couple of zeros. I don't know if he was hurt those weeks or what. But overall, the highs are a little bit lower than the 50 that I said he ran in week 2 and the 38 that he ran in week 4. Those would have been, the 50 would have been a season high last year. And the 34 would have been second last year. High point last year for routes run came 53 routes in week 1 against Buffalo. 43 routes. After that, the high point was 33 routes in week 5. So, yeah, I would say probably a little bit less involvement in the actual passing attack for Tyler Higbee. Probably won't see a ding in his snaps or anything, but will probably run fewer routes and see fewer targets. So, good call there. Good question. I'm sitting here clicking on the video window for that spreadsheet, wondering why it's not sorting. I think that's it for that one. So big yeses on both sides, primarily in the passing game, but definitely don't skimp on the DeAndre Swift shares. What was Swift's 2.75 targets a game, but what does Swift jump to last couple of weeks? DeAndre. So his targets, along with his carries and everything, have skewed well. Targets went from 2 to 3, back down to 2, and then to 4 last week. Routes run, more importantly, went from 13 to 17, down to 0. I don't know if that's accurate or not. And then back up to 21 last week. Was targeted on 19% of the routes that he ran. 4 targets, caught all 4 of them. 23 yards, didn't get in the end zone. But that was his most productive receiving week. So, I think that's encouraging. A little bit of volume through the air to go with the significant volume on the ground. Pretty good spot for DeAndre Swift. Last one up. Kind of a clunker. Not the greatest way in the world to end the show. I think Anthony Richardson's very playable and very interesting. Outside of him, Jonathan Taylor, got to deal with that whole situation. Derrick Henry I like. No Treylon Burks for Tennessee, so maybe you see a little bit of an uptick for DeAndre. On this side, I like Michael Pittman. I think Michael Pittman's good. Josh Downs and Alec Pierce, I think, are good receivers to go with Anthony Richardson into that stack. My issue with Richardson is still just kind of a developing as a passer. And then when we're going to him as a rush-based quarterback, going up against the first-ranked 2.9 yards per rush attempt that Tennessee's been giving up, they've been just playing as a pass funnel defense so far this year. 7 yards per pass attempt, ranks 26th, but they've been shutting down the run. That plays more against Jonathan Taylor than it does, and Zach Moss certainly, than it does against Richardson. But it has an impact on Richardson. And if he's not going to be delivering the ball downfield, kind of limits these guys. He's been okay as a passer, but he hasn't really had a breakout game as a passer. On the other side, it's the Derrick Henry show primarily for me. I like how he projects. Going up against a fairly decent rush defense, though. 3.8 yards per rush attempt, ranks 9th. They're another team that kind of funnels to the pass. 25th ranked. They're basically the same. These guys tied. Little bit of potential, but I don't love going to Tannehill. Tannehill and Hopkins will be the most popular pairing of this offense. So now if I'm trying to get away without Treylon out there, they're number 2, I got to go to Nick Westbrook, or I got to go to Chig Okonkwo, who hasn't done anything yet this year. Chris Moore. It gets really ugly over there. I kind of just like sticking with the Derrick Henry play and expecting that they just feed volume to Derrick Henry. Getting into the man-for-man of it all. Richardson does project out well. 9th on both sites by points, but 14th and 13th by value. We'll skip right over to the rushing. 7.7 rush attempts per game, 131 yards. He's run the ball in 4 times already. 5.7 rush yards per attempt. Through the air, though, only 159 yards a game. He's thrown 3 touchdowns in 3 games. 1 interception so far. Taking shots, trying to get the ball out, 7.5 air yards per attempt, but only completing 3.6 air yards per attempt. Tannehill on the other side, a pretty significant 10 intended air yards per attempt, but only coming up with 4.8. 7.3 yards per attempt total, 6.7 yards per attempt total for Richardson. 13 passes in the red zone for Tannehill versus 5 for Richardson. But Richardson's got the upside of, if he's not going to throw the ball into when they're in the red zone, there's a pretty significant possibility they're going to be running the ball into the end zone. So I don't mind that. But overall, 24 pass attempts per game, 27 pass attempts per game. Neither one of these teams really slings the ball around that much. Tannehill only 14th. Jumps up to 9th because he only costs $4,900 by point per dollar. If you believe there's good enough reason to play him because he's so cheap, I just don't really believe. I don't really see it. Taylor coming back. The whole contract situation, got his extension finally. Also was dealing with an ankle injury. Projects out okay. Not sure what the usage is going to look like. Zach Moss hasn't been any good at all. So we're not really losing very much with Zach Moss coming out. It's just a matter of, what do we get out of Taylor? Moss was giving us 4.2 yards per rush attempt, 22 a game, 93 yards, 1 touchdown. Taylor last year, that is too many Taylors. $11 games, 192 carries for 861 and 4 touchdowns. The year before, in 2021, he carried the ball 332 times for 1,800 yards and 18 touchdowns. Pretty monstrous season. 5.5 yards per carry that year, 4.5 yards per rush attempt last year. 10 games over 100 yards in 2021, only 2 games over 100 yards last year. 51 targets in 2021, only 40 last year. But that's kind of tied to the 11 games played versus 17. 360 yards and 2 TDs through the air in 21, only 28 for 143, no touchdowns through the air in 2022. First game back, high ankle sprain, don't really know. I expect he's going to be out there. I expect he's going to see a fairly healthy volume of snaps, of carries. But I just don't really know what to make of it. The fact that he costs $68.74 helps me not really care. He just kind of falls into the middle, and if I lose a running back that falls into the middle like that, outside of the Jonathan Taylor came out and put up a monster, but you run that risk with basically anybody that you don't play. Derrick Henry, I'm much more interested in. Ranks 3rd by points on both sites, 8th by value on DK, 10th by value on FanDuel. 18 and a quarter carries a game, 71 yards a game, 3.9 yards per rush attempt, 2 scores so far. His usage's volume has varied a little bit so far this season. In week 1, he carried the ball 15 times for 63 yards. Week 2, 25 carries for 80 yards and a touchdown. Week 3, back down to 11 carries for only 20 yards. That was a mess against that pretty decent Cleveland defense. And then last week, his best game of the season, 22 carries for 122 against and a touchdown against Cincinnati. Targeted 2 times, 3 times, targeted 3 times, 4 times, 0 times, and 1 time. 2 catches, 3 catches, 0 catches, and 1 catch. Not as involved in the passing game this year, but plenty of upside. He does have Tajay Spears there, poaching some snaps. Poaching some touches. He's carrying the ball 5 times a game. He's getting targeted 3.5 times a game. So that's where a couple of Derrick Henry's targets from last year went. But overall, it's still Derrick Henry's backfield. 7,500, easy to get to. 9,000, easy enough to get to. Not an ideal price on the FanDuel slate, but easy enough. Wide receivers, tight ends to round things out. As I said, no Treylon. So it's as many looks as DeAndre Hopkins can handle, I think. Ranks 13th by points on DK, 18th by points on FanDuel, 16th for value on FanDuel, 21st for value on DK. 53% of the snaps last week, 65% on average. Runs a lot of routes when he's out there. 66% routes run on the 53% snaps. 8 targets a game is what it amounts to. Out targets everybody else in this offense. Chig drawing 3 targets a game. Nick Westbrook drawing 5 targets a game. Hopkins is the downfield operator here. 12.4 yard ADOT. Okonkwo and Nick Westbrook, 5.5, 7.4. You also get Chris Moore out there for a couple of looks, 2 targets a game, 25.6 yard ADOT. It's not insignificant. With, let's see, what did... Last week with Burks out, Chris Moore ran 24 routes. He was targeted 3 times. He caught 1 of them for 44 yards. But given that they looked his direction a few times, given that they let him run a season-high routes, basically doubled his previous season high in routes run, he's at least somewhat interesting as a downfield shot. For dead minimum price. Doesn't project well at all. There's got to be volume to support a projection. But as a total dart throw, a couple looks. That's all you really need. Gets the right one. Turns that into, instead of just a empty 44-yard score, that would look a lot better fantasy-wise if that had been 1 touchdown for 44, or 1 catch for 44 yards and a touchdown. Or better yet, 3 catches on 3 targets for, 85 yards and a touchdown, 100 yards and a touchdown. Now we're really getting carried away. It's DeAndre Hopkins' offense in the passing game. It's Derrick Henry's offense overall. But Hopkins and Tannehill is a viable pairing. It'll be popular within Tannehill stacks. So that's where I kind of want to vary, get to some Westbrook, some Chris Moore. Westbrook last week, and I know it's Westbrook Akini. I'm just feeling lazy and my word maker is tired. Six targets last week for Westbrook Akini. Ran 26 routes. Caught 5 of them for 51 and a touchdown. Had a touchdown in week 3 also. Caught 3 passes for 25 yards. 3 of 3 that week. He ran 20 routes that week. Ran 27 routes without getting targeted in that ugly Cleveland game. Week 1, he ran 32 routes, was targeted on 21.9% of them, 7 targets that week, 4 catches, 58 yards. So a reasonably viable number 2 for very cheap, 3,500. I could maybe give his projection a bump on the back of some targets. This might come up a little bit. I might give him an additional opportunity to catch the ball. Somebody's got to get it. I didn't really distribute it anywhere. I gave DeAndre a little bit of it, and then I didn't finish putting the rest of it into these guys because I didn't really have a good feel for where it's going to go. Okonkwo, 11th on both sites by raw points at the tight end. Does land 6th on the value board for 3,200 on DK. There is that. Overall this season, last week, 3 targets on 22 routes run. Caught all 3 of them for 29 yards. His season high was 4 catches for 35 yards on 4 targets. 18 routes run in week 2. He ran 17 routes in week 3. Caught 3 of 4 for 7 yards. As you might be catching on to, these are not impressive numbers. Drawing 1.3 yards per route run last week, 0.8 on the season, 3 targets a game. Has turned it into no touchdowns. Nick Westbrook actually has 2 touchdowns. Hopkins has 0. That's Mo Alley Cox has 1. Hopkins has been targeted 5 times in the red zone. Nick Westbrook's been targeted 4 times in the red zone. It's really, I think we know where the ball's going here, really, primarily is Hopkins and Westbrook, and then maybe some downfield shots for Chris Moore there. Pittman, on the other side, the best receiver in this game at this point, probably. I think he's better than Hopkins at this point in their careers. Ranks 12th and 32nd on DK, 12th and 17th on FanDuel, where he's a little bit better looking. 95% of the snaps last week, 98% on average, runs routes 55% of the time when he's out there, gets targeted on 27% of that 55%. 10 targets a game, 28.7% of the volume. He's got a touchdown on the season, a 7.3-yard ADOT. Alec Pierce is the downfield monster here. 17.7-yard ADOT. He's the only guy operating downfield in this offense. He only gets 4 targets a game, 10% of the volume. But that's your downfield weapon. That's your home run play. 1 red zone target for him, a 38-yard long so far this season. He's out there running routes. He's out there 91% of the snaps. Last week, 95% on average. Runs a route on a little less than half of those 95% of the snaps. So like a quarter of the time he's out there running routes. Overall for the season, 1.7 yards per route run for Mike Pittman, 1.4 for Josh Downs, and only 0.8 for Alec Pierce. Kylan Granson, a little bit of an afterthought. He's drawing 5 targets a game. 36% targets per route run. But he runs routes 20% of the 58% of the time that he's out there. 14% overall target share. He does have a touchdown. 6.9-yard ADOT. 2 targets in the red zone. If I'm going to this passing attack, it's pretty clearly just straight down the line. 1, 2, home run threat, tight end. There's nothing mysterious about this in Indy offense. Granson at 3,000, 17th and 18th. Projects out all right for that money, but would be drawing a stronger point per dollar number if he was really, really valuable. Outside of that, there's not much really to work with. Jimmy James says he's going to be calling 1-800-GAMBLER tomorrow around 4:30. Hopefully to tell them how well you did and thank them for their time and tell them you'll see them later because you just won $1 million. Arizona stacks so cheap, says Bill Byers. He also says he's got Henry for a few already. Hopkins looks fine. Week 5 make or break week, says Vic David Figueroa. Everybody's getting into that New England game. New England, New Orleans. Trey, I really don't have a great read on that. How does Taylor affect Richardson and the run game and specifically the red zone goal line rush attempts? That's really difficult to nail down until we have any idea, and we won't, because it'll be a different situation for Taylor next week. He'll have practice under his belt and so on and so forth. We'll have an idea of what they did this week, but it won't necessarily inform us about next week unless this week he comes out and he's full go. If that's the case, then we know next week, all right, he's full go. If he comes out and he's 20% this week, next week we're dealing with, all right, is he 50%? It's still a mystery. So to speculate it down the line like that, it becomes complex. What I will say is that just having Richardson's nascent rushing ability in the red zone is a weapon in and of itself. So I don't think that they would necessarily go away from it. It's just something that they would scheme for, and they would also have other looks that are for Taylor. They're going to have definitely the up and over plays, the brotherly shove, so on and so forth, in really close. It could have a impact for sure, but it probably just gets to the point where it's a variable impact that already existed between just the rushing game in general, whoever it is, and Richardson. With a little bit more talent there, a guy they just paid, does it skew a little bit? Probably. But does that happen immediately this week? I really couldn't tell you. Put it this way, can't quantify it, not something I'm going to worry about. How about that? I'm probably not going to have that much Jonathan Taylor, though. I really am not all that enthusiastic about that spot. Bill Byers says he would play Richardson naked, even with JT in this week, and Pittman's not good enough for him. Yeah, I don't have an issue with the naked Richardson play. I think there's enough rush touchdown equity there, enough big game upside, and the idea that he might just, even if he has a good passing game, again, in what should be a very good opportunity, the best opportunity he's seen so far to have a good passing game, even if he does have a big passing game, there's a not insignificant chance that he's just spreading it around, so you don't really care about losing the receivers. Beantown says, I think they said limited this week in terms of Taylor? It wouldn't surprise me if he was limited this week. Just getting him back, you don't necessarily want to slam him. With that in mind, guys, we're 3 hours down. We've lost a handful of people that have bailed out on the show at this point, and I can hear the voice starting to slip. If we did another hour, I'd probably wake up tomorrow not pretty hoarse, not all that able to talk. But got a lot of work to do tonight. Going to be running off 20, 50,000 lineups, something like that. Creating the new groups. Basically do a whole redo on the groups article. Build in some recommendations. I've been kind of doing it in the form of notes this year rather than the specifics, since I can't get into FC. I don't have the specific bump them, this percent, but hopefully the notes are helpful. Going to update all the changes for the news. Going to keep an eye on any changes for projections. I'll run a new set of projections for the morning. I'll get rankings updated for the morning. The above below column will be written for the morning. Everything will be at your fingertips, free of charge, at rotoscouts. Follow the at rotoscouts Twitter handle. Give that some love when you see stuff pop up over there. Helps us grow the community. Hit the like and the subscribe here. Make sure you're in the Discord. Catch any changes. Catch any chat. Q&A in the morning. I'll be around. With that in mind, guys, week 5 in the books for the show. Lineup still to go. It's going to be a lot of fun getting stuff together. I like this week. I really do. I think there's a lot of opportunity this week. With that in mind, good luck out there. Somebody go win something. I'll see you later.